All set? Set. All right, let me call the Inland Wetlands Commission meeting of New Canaan of Monday, February 27th to order. Will the secretary take the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Stepanek,
Here.
Ms. Jameson, here, Mr. Perkins,
Here.
Mr. Sillo,
Here.
Ms. Voitie, here, Ms. Sanford, here, Ms. Brunali, absent, Ms. Owsley, here.
All right, Miss Katie, would you substitute for Beth Brunelli?
Oh, well.
Thank you. Approval of the agenda. You all have a copy of the agenda. Any comments, questions? If not, can I hear a motion?
I move we accept the agenda.
George is making a motion, and Priscilla, you're seconding it.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Fine.
Approval of the minutes of the regular meeting, January 23rd. Again, are there any comments, deletions, questions? If not, can I have a motion? I'll make a motion. Who wants to second it?
I'll second it.
Angela seconds it. All those in favor?
Aye.
Fine.
All right, motion is carried. Applications to be received and if complete will be scheduled for a future regular meeting, and there are none. Okay. Number 6, site visit is scheduled for March 16th at 8 a.m. regarding pending applications for 1218 Smithbridge Road and 67 Carter Street. I need to take a vote to see if we have a quorum for that. Is that a Wednesday?
It's actually a Thursday.
A Thursday? Can I have a raise of hands of people that can make that?
That's a yes, we can make it.
We can make it. Priscilla can make it, Beth can make it, Anthony, George.
I think I can, yeah.
So I cannot make it, so we have a quorum.
We do have a quorum.
So that's, the site visit is March 16th, okay? Now. Next on here is open the public hearing. We'll continue the public hearing. Before we do, I'd like to make an announcement. The commission is under a statutory deadline, and we hope to close the public hearing tonight. However, we will give those new individuals wishing to speak an opportunity to do so. If you speak, I ask all comments to be new information, and that those speaking not repeat any information already given. The presentations outline for tonight's meeting will be first, the peer reviewers. Are they,
Joe Canis is present in the audience. Our from Ty and Bond, Maria Coplet, our town engineer, is zooming in. I am currently looking on our folks here to see if Michael Pine has joined the meeting as of yet. I'm just looking for him.
But while you're doing that, the second set of presenters will be the interveners. The third set, any public comments from either the audience or from Zoom. And finally, the applicant's rebuttal. And after each presentation, the commission and or staff can ask any questions. And before we begin these presentations, let me take care of another piece of business. If we don't conclude the public hearing tonight, and not only the length, but also there's a snowstorm on the way, and we'll gauge that as we go along. Can I have a raise of hands of people that need to leave early, or a snowstorm may affect you getting home? Is there anyone out? Seriously? Yeah?
No,
Chris,
we're
okay.
good.
Okay.
I think we're.
But anyway, the snowstorm, I understand it's going to start right now, pretty close. We would, if we don't conclude tonight, we would hold a special hearing on Wednesday, March 1st. That's 2 days from now at 6 p.m. to conclude the public hearing. If we do this, I need to see a raise of commissioners' hands to make certain we have a quorum to attend this special meeting on March 1st. So please raise your hands if you can make the March 1st meeting. I can.
What time would that be? Mr.
6
Chairman?
o'clock.
Oh, okay.
I guess everybody can make it.
Everyone. Okay,
Everyone.
great.
Good, thank you. All right.
What about the applicants or anyone who speaks? Maybe you might want to
Oh, yeah.
make sure that depending on how we conclude tonight, I'm not sure what might happen on Wednesdays.
Is there anyone that can't in the audience?
That's an applicant or interveners.
No, for the record, Chris Smith, on behalf of the owner applicant Hill Street 72 LLC. If we, for some reason, can't finish tonight, our team would be available on Wednesday.
What?
Jonathan Shapiro for the interveners, no issue on our end if we have to continue on Wednesday, but hopefully we can all conclude tonight.
All right, thank you. Finally, one more thing. We would have a meeting on Monday, March 13th, when all of the commissioners meet in town hall to discuss and deliberate on the information presented at the previous 3 wetlands meetings. Peter
Gelderman.
Gelderman,
He's on the call.
the town attorney, will be present to help us move towards a final decision on the application. It will be like a workshop meeting to help the commission draft a decision resolution. Can I have a raise of hands of those who can make that on that meeting on March 13th? It's a Monday. Katie can't make it? Priscilla can, Beth can. Anthony, can you make it?
Yep.
All right, so we can have that.
What time would that be?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
All right, now moving along. Are there any questions about any of the procedures? Okay. Let's begin tonight's meeting and presentations from the peer reviewers. Is he on the phone?
Well, we're going to start with Joe, since
Yeah.
he's here. I don't see Michael on the call as of yet. There's 23 people on the call, zooming in anyway, or 20, actually. I have emailed him, texted him to see if he's on the call. So he certainly knows tonight's the night. So
All right, maybe he'll,
maybe
We
we'll
got
get
time.
Joe started.
yeah, Joe Kenneth.
Yeah, sure. Before I begin, would you prefer if I take the podium or sit in front of you?
Whichever you're more comfortable doing, you
Okay.
you can speak to this microphone, so just go to the left or the right, that middle one just stays where it is.
Okay,
Then we'll be able to pick up everything.
great. Thank
Why
you.
don't you move it over to you in front of you?
We'll swing it back the other way.
Okay, good evening. For the record, my name's Joseph Canis. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Connecticut with the firm of Ty and Bond, where I'm a principal engineer. We were retained by the commission to do a peer review for the engineering aspects of the application, specifically the stormwater management and the erosion controls. We visited the site back in November of 2022, and I issued a letter shortly thereafter with some general high-level overview comments, which were followed up by a detailed letter on December 12th, 2022, which had several pages of comments and requests for clarification. Since then, we have received updated information from the applicant and a response letter that was received on Friday, February 15th. And we prepared a letter actually dated today, commenting on those materials. And so I'm not going to go through the letter point by point. It's a 23-page letter. And half of that is just documenting the information that came in for review. But in general, The applicant's engineer has addressed most of our comments. There are a few comments that still need some additional responses or some additional clarifications. And be happy to hear from the applicant tonight to see how they intend to resolve some of those comments. Some of them are minor and could be incorporated as a potential condition of approval. But the thing to keep in mind with this particular project, it's a lot of work in a confined area. So if the commission were to approve this project, we would strongly recommend some very robust bonding measures, as well as monitoring requirements that are in line with the Connecticut DEP's construction general permit. So with that said, what I'll do is I'll highlight the comments that still need some additional response. And I'll feel free to answer any questions the commission might have. So if you're following along in my letter, the first comment is the 1A comments. Those are the roadside safety comments. And those items are typically not under the purview of inland wetlands. That's more of a planning and zoning item or a fire department comment or a fire department review. But in this case, I thought it was important to bring those out because they could impact changes to the wall. For example, if the wall design were to change or they had to move something on the wall, that would have an impact on the wetlands or certainly your upland review area. So with that in mind, basically, I had some comments about the placement of guardrail relative to the wall and how that would impact the wall design, as well as some additional comments on if a sidewalk's warranted, because all those could impact that design. Basically for the wall comments, the applicant has responded that they are doing a wall evaluation. I understand one did come in over the weekend, but unfortunately I just didn't have the time to review it for this meeting. But that said, the real risk here is, if the design does change, the applicant has to come back before the commission. Right. I think that's the biggest risk, and that's a risk that the applicant takes upon themselves. If there are some design changes that are warranted as a result of the additional evaluations that they're doing. So that's just my general overview of the A1, the roadside safety comments.
So what page are you on in your?
Okay, yep, those start on page 10.
What page?
Page 10 of the letter.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Page 9, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the very bottom of page 9. Okay, yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So then moving on, I had some comments on the stormwater management, and this is probably the largest comment that I have. I'm on page 12, comment C1. My initial comment on December 12th was to provide a comparison of the pre-development and post-development volumes. In addition to the peak flow, the applicant prepared tables summarizing the difference in pre-development and post-development peak flow rates, which met town regulations. I requested also comparison of volume, and the applicant, they analyzed the 1, 2, 5, all the way up to the 50-year design storm events, right? And they've looked at both peak flow rate and volume for pre-development and post-development conditions. Based on the changes in the design, the post-development flow rates are less than the pre-development flow rates, and they have the calculations to document that. But the applicant is also documenting increases in volume. Now, the volume increase on a percentage basis, and if you look at it in comparison to the 5 Mile River watershed, it's a small volume. We don't anticipate it would have negative impacts on the downstream wetlands, but the town's requirement is that, and the town's drainage policy is that there be no increase in volume. So the application as it's presented now does not conform to the town's requirements for volume. It does conform to the requirements for peak flow control. I wanted to bring that to the commission's attention. Now, how the commission chooses to handle it, I would take a look at your regulations to see if you have the ability to waive that and how you've treated it on other applications, so you're consistent in the treatment of this applications with how the commission has historically viewed increases in volume, if they have granted that waiver. So that would be my advice to you, is to take a look at what you've done in the past and be consistent with your past actions. If there is an ability to waive, to issue a waiver. If there's no ability to issue a waiver in your regulations, then it's pretty clear that as designed right now, it doesn't meet that volume requirement.
You see the top of this.
So my next comment that I had some additional comments, requests on is on page 13. It is comment C3A. It has to do with the liner around the concrete galley system. This is the detention system. So it's the largest system on the site. It's the one, I believe, that's immediately south of the building. That one there's not being used for infiltration. It's because it's partially below the groundwater table, right? And in order to keep the groundwater from flowing into the system, they're wrapping the system in a polyethylene liner, right? So basically it's wrapped in plastic to prevent the water from entering the groundwater from entering that system. And this is a small detail. What I'm looking for here is determine how much of, when you wrap that system, obviously you don't want the two ends to kind of meet, butt together. You want some overlap when it's wrapped. And I just wanted that called out in the detail, some dimension in the detail to clarify that. So that's a relatively small plan modification. Moving on through the comments. Next comment I had is on page 15. And this is at the top of the page. It's numbered 4. I believe it's comment C4. And this has to do with access. On the, there's the wall that fronts the parking area, right, that runs along the wetlands. And there is a level spreader at the bottom of that wall. And there's also a scour pad, a riprap scour pad also at the bottom of the wall. That wall is 8 feet high. My concern was how do the facilities managers get down there to maintain that? That was one question that I had. The applicant has stated that they could use ladders to get down there, which works. That could work for inspection. That could work for something minor if they're just raking a little bit of debris. Somebody could lower a bucket down. They could put the debris in the bucket. But if you need to supplement that, for example, if there's crushed stone that washes out from the level spreader, or if there's riprap that washes out from that scour pad, I think using a ladder to do that, that's going to be pretty awkward. Looking at the plans, it looks like there is a way to get down there with a wheelbarrow. If you go to the northwest corner of the site where that retaining wall ends, and they're proposing a catch basin, they might be able to take a wheelbarrow, get it down there. But that needs to be clarified in the stormwater maintenance plan, including the use of a ladder for inspection. That needs to go in that stormwater management plan, the stormwater operations and maintenance plan that have been prepared for the project. Moving a little bit further down the page, again, comment C5B. Again, this is another liner comment. This one, this particular system, and I think I had another comment like this. These are the ones that are closest to the edge of the parking lot. And the applicant is proposing a liner on the side of the system that faces the wall to inhibit that horizontal movement of exfiltrating water from that system. One of the comments I had, it's similar to the previous comment I had on the liners, but is just to show that dimension where it's over the top or the bottom. The next comment is also on page 15 with respect to this has to do with the location of the stormwater detention basin. In this case, is infiltration. And its proximity to the wall. The concern here was as water exfiltrates out of the system, what kind of pressure does it put on that wall, right? You have water that's coming out of the infiltration system. And as it makes its way down, it's also moving, basically diagonally as well. And it looks like it would impact the bottom of the wall. That line of influence would come in contact with the bottom of the wall. So my concern here is to make sure that there's no short circuiting of the water treatment, because the point of infiltration is to be able to get that runoff and have it soak into the ground So it gets treated and the pollutants are removed. But in the case of the wall, if it gets to the wall, it's picked up by the wall under drainage system. So you don't get that same level of treatment. The applicant's response was that they're evaluating that. They're having a geotechnical engineer look at that wall. There was a wall evaluation that came in, but unfortunately, I just did not have the time to review that before today's hearing. Moving on to the next page. Comment C6B. Again, this is another polyethylene liner comment, just same situation, but just a different system. Again, looking for that dimension. Again, I think that's a pretty small comment that the applicant should be able to address pretty easily. The following comment, comment C6C. This is again more of a structural comment. Again, similar to my previous comment with the concern about the impact of the exfiltrating wall on the structural integrity of the adjacent wall. Okay, so the next comment is C8, which is on page 17. What I'm looking for here is hydraulic computation. So basically, looking at the on-site storm pipes that are proposed and computing their capacity. And the applicant's engineer indicated that they will provide such calculations as before the building permit. And most municipalities will require these computations as a condition, during the planning and zoning approval process, or in our case, inland wetlands. I reviewed the town's drainage policy and didn't specifically indicate that hydraulic computations for on-site storm sewers were required. So, however, I did ask the applicant to check the outlets specifically because those have the greatest impact on the wetlands in terms of area disturbance. For example, if they undersize a pipe and that pipe needs to be larger, that also increases the riprap apron at the end of the pipe. So there are some potential impacts of some, it would increase in disturbance within your upland review area. So I did ask the applicant to provide at least that information because that I think that's where that has the biggest impact in terms from this perspective of a wetland review. The next comment I had is on page 18. This comment is a question of DEP policy.
What number are you talking about?
I'm sorry. Yep, it's number 11 at the top. Okay, sorry about that. So DEP has a policy that where basically any drain that's undercover. So if you think of, for in this instance, right, there are some drains that are proposed within the footprint of the building on the parking level.
Can I interrupt you
Sure.
just for a minute? For some reason, we've lost our video.
Oh,
So I'm gonna go back there and play with some wires.
okay. So I'll,
I don't know why that would happen.
okay,
Ask for some assistance. We'll see if somebody comes along.
okay, great.
Anybody got any jokes or stories?
Instead of video, we could use like those sketch artists, right, for the courtrooms.
Well,
Does this mean it's not being recorded?
Yeah.
Mm.
it's like-
Technology is wonderful when it works.
Pam's not here, you guys. Oh, there's some guys, the technicians here, I saw him. Oh, yeah.
Somebody was got that Tucker Murphy who was helping.
What?
I think there's somebody,
In the wrong room.
I think so. I think town council think they're in here. Third member of town council.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-oh.
You slide over, I can fix it. Okay, you should be back.
All right. All right.
Oh, here we are again.
Hooray.
And we're back.
Okay. We're back.
Let's start over again.
Okay. Again, for the record, Joseph Canis, P with Ty and Bond, my apologies for breaking the video connection inadvertently. Okay, so we're back on page 18, comment number 11. And so as we're explaining, the DEP has a policy that any floor drain undercovers, for example, in a parking area, such as what we have here that are proposed here, should go to an oil water separator and then into the sanitary sewer. The applicant engineer's response was, in this case, it's not completely enclosed. There's openings on, two, up to 3 sides. And rain blowing in would, enter that area. So what would happen in this instance is that you would get rainfall. It would be collected by this interior floor drain, and under the DEP policy would go to the sanitary sewer. And obviously you don't want to be treating rainwater at your wastewater treatment plant. So, that question did have some merit. I reached out to DEP for an interpretation. Unfortunately, I did not hear back from them in time for today's hearing. I also reached out to two different contacts that I have at different WPCAs, and I got 2 different answers. So in this case, in terms of the inland wetland impact, I think it's a fairly simple design modification. It does. Right now, the drains are shown going to the storm sewer. If they do need to go to the sanitary sewer, it would not impact the amount of flow or the concentration of pollutants that goes into the wetlands. So in this case, it could be done as a design modification. So unfortunately, I don't have additional insight on that particular comment at this time. The next one is comment 13, which is also at the bottom of page 18. One of the comments that I had in the initial drawings was this is at the back of the site where the rock slope is proposed. My concern was with the runoff from the adjacent properties. The watershed continues well upstream, well past this property. And my concern was that runoff would be essentially pouring over the rock cut and then scouring out the base of the rock cut at the parking lot. So in response, the applicant has added a swale to the top of the rock cut, which and is redirecting that clean water around the site, which which is an improvement in my opinion. But I did have a comment about the capacity of the swale and how that was computed. And I I do have to say, as part of this letter, with these additional comments that we received, these additional responses that we received, all this new material, it did generate some additional comments, which I can go over and towards the end of my presentation. So my next comment is on page 19, comment C14. And this was actually a fairly minor comment. There are 2-yard drains near the rear of the property that are discharging to an 8-inch PVC pipe. That pipe has a 45-degree bend in it. My concern is, I prefer not to see bends in pipes that take runoff from inlets. For roof leaders, that's fine, but if it's from an inlet, my concern is, it's more prone to clogging. The applicant actually did not have a response to that comment. And from what I remember, I don't think it was changed on the plans, but that comment's still out there. My next comment is on page 21. It is comment E3A, and it's in reference to the winter maintenance operations. As part of the response, I know we weren't the only ones that had comments on snow management. And the applicant put together a detailed narrative, which included a map of potential snow storage areas. One of the questions I had was the proposed snow storage areas, they do take up 15 parking spaces. And my question was, how does that impact the required parking count if those spaces aren't available? And then the other question I had, which I did not see in the narrative, was how was that required area calculated for the how was that area decided, if that was sufficient to hold the snow volume? Just would like some additional background on that. And then that brings me into the new comments that I had, which are on page 22 of my letter. And again, the first two, F1 and F2, are the ones about the snow management plan. Finally, on the last page, page 23. The proposed swale at the top of the rock cut, runs along the top of the rock cut, then comes down the sides, as the rock cut starts to level off. And that swale discharges into a catch basin. My concern here is, as it's coming down around the sides of that rock cut towards the catch basin, it's on a fairly steep slope. My concern is that the water would shoot right past that catch basin at the end. So what I'm looking for here is for the applicant to consider some sort of backstop or curb. That way that intercepts the runoff and forces it into the catch basin to reduce the possibility of that runoff bypassing the catch basin. Comment 4, that's just a minor drafting comment. Just something was overprinted on the notes just to make those a little bit more readable. Comment 5, this speaks to the sediment erosion control. The applicant initially had, I believe, 3 phases. It's now broken into 7 phases with a lot more clarity. I just had a question about the flow depth in each of the diversion swales that are proposed to make sure that those swales are sufficiently sized. Another comment I had about this swale at the top of the rock cut, I see that modified riprap is proposed. Just want to make sure that modified riprap is sufficient to withstand the shear stresses as the water picks up velocity. The faster the water goes, the greater the volume of that runoff flowing through there, the greater the chance that the lining could be scoured out. So there's a procedure in the DOT drainage manual where you can compute the shear stresses of your channel lining material. So this is just a question to make sure that the modified riprap is sufficiently large enough to withstand those shear stresses. 7 is a minor consistency comment between the sediment erosion controls and the earthwork. I'm sure the applicant can clarify that. Number 8 is a question on the sediment erosion controls. about their phasing plan. They had a phase 1 and then phases 2A through 2C. And then there was phase 3. Phases 4 and 5 look like there's the road-based construction as well as paving in phase 5. But phase 3, it wasn't, looked like there would still be a need for a temporary sediment trap. So that's what that question relates to. And then the last comment was, there are fueling and maintenance activities that were detailed in those sediment and erosion control plans for phases 1 through 3. There's still going to be a need for that in phases 4 and 5, but I didn't see those on the plans. The other thing I did want to point out is the town engineer also had a comment related to volume, and there was another comment, which was a good one that I think is important to address before the hearing closes, about the capacity of one of the detention systems. Some of them it appears the water surface elevations exceed the available storage in the system itself. So I think of all the comments I had this evening, probably the most important ones are the comments I had related to volume, as well as the town engineer's comment on the water surface elevation in the proposed detention systems. So I'd be happy to answer any questions the commission might have.
Go ahead.
For the record, this is Angela Jameson. Mr. Canis, thank you for this very detailed report. And for the comment at the end where you said that the most significant comments related to question of volume as well as the town engineer's comments. Do you think you could just elaborate in a little more detail the nature of your concern?
Okay, sure. For the town engineer's comment, and I understand she is on Zoom tonight. The concern is for the larger storm events, for the 50 and the 100, the proposed detention systems, the water surface elevation, so how high the water gets into that system, were computed so that they were actually above the top of the system. So that means that the system surcharged, and there's basically more stormwater going to that system than the system can support. So I think that's important. I think the other thing I should point out too is the applicant has made some certain conservative assumptions as part of portions of their design. And I think maybe if they took a second look at some of those assumptions, it could fall within that, but they need to do, they actually have to go through the process of doing that design or, reviewing those computations. And in terms of the,
Joe, just with,
Joe,
I'm sorry,
say that again.
with that,
okay,
maybe for clarification.
Yep.
Would that be potentially attributed to a potential impact to a wetlands if the stormwater systems are not functioning better, I guess is.
right, well,
Or in your
right, yeah,
opinion.
there is a potential impact if this storm water detention systems are not designed, they're undersized. Right, because what that would do was it would increase the velocity coming out of the system. Right, and then you'd also have portions of the system not operate as they were intended. Right, so you could get some overflow from the system. In this case, I think if these systems were to cause ponding, most of probably be localized on the site, but there is a chance that it could start to run down the driveway. And water, tends to do funny things when it, allowed to run rampant. So in this case, I think the most significant impact would be if these are undesigned, you might end up getting more flow through the system at a, because it's operating under pressure. So you get a faster velocity coming out of the outlets.
Thank you. That's
Sure.
helpful. Maria is on the call and is prepared to speak or address. There she is. She just popped into the room.
Yes,
I don't want to shortcut Joe, but it seems like the timing is right, maybe to have Maria pick up this portion of it, or would you like to continue to hear question Joe?
Well, Joe, stay where you are. Well,
Okay.
let's hear Murray and then we may come back to you, you know.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Yes, I am Maria Coplet, town engineer, and out of respect for the commission, the applicant and interested parties, I will not repeat some of the thorough items raised by Joe, but I will clarify that the engineering department has reviewed the revisions that were presented to us as part of the site plan review set and drainage summary report by DeAndrea Surveying and Engineering PC dated February 15th. We reviewed and issued a memo today dated February 27th with our updated comments that outlined additional required information or clarification to the application. A number of our comments had been addressed, but there are still some overall comments that really do need to be adhered to, and one of them being the increase in volume. And one thing that I do, the runoff volume. One thing that I do want to stress is that as part of our requirement in our drainage policy, the engineer's report needs to document whether or not there are known flooding concerns in the area. And though that we had no known flooding concerns in our right of way, there have been and have been voiced at these meetings neighbors that are adjacent to the project who have flooding concerns. And that is now documented in the applicant's report. But because of that, I think it is a heightened concern to make sure that the increases in volume are addressed and that the post-development conditions have runoff volumes that are either equal to or less than existing conditions. So I just wanted to clarify that one item. And then another issue is, for the record, as long as the applicant provides oil grit separators for the catch basins under the structure, Public Works and the engineering department's strong preference would be to connect the basins to the proposed stormwater management structures, as the contribution to both the sewer main and the wastewater treatment facility could challenge the town's available capacity. So we do have concerns with that potential option. Furthermore, though not necessarily stormwater management related, DPW engineering requests that the applicant evaluate currently constructed driveway, as it will likely be used as a pedestrian path for residents and their guests to and from the property. And given the volume anticipated on the driveway, based on the 93 residential units versus the originally planned 2 residences, provisions for safe means of egress to right-of-way by pedestrian provided, as the driveway is the sole access point to the property. This safe means of ingress and egress are required by the building and fire code, and they could potentially expand the scope of work adjacent to and within the wetlands. Those were really the only other items that I wanted to address other than Joe's thorough comments.
Any questions of Murray? Did anyone have a question for Joe down here?
Yeah.
oh,
Beth
Beth.
Sanford, for the record. You mentioned that you would describe the assumptions that are driving the calculations as being conservative. What are the other flavors of making estimates, and what is the margin difference? Or can you give us some sense of if they were a little bit more aggressive, or how varied the actual volume and
Sure.
velocity calculations? I
Sure.
think would be.
One example I could think of was when they did when the applicant did their soil testing, they did some infiltration tests out there. And they looked at specific, looked at the drop in basically dig a hole, fill it with water, and you measure the drop over time. And what they did was, they took an average of that over 1 hour windows. They discarded the values if they were outside a certain range, but only if they were faster. So by discarding the faster time increments, right, that leads to a design of the infiltration system that's based on a slower infiltration rate. So that could impact, that might be one of the reasons why their volumes might be, the volume reduction might not be there. Whether or not that, tips it and, go in the other direction. My sense is it probably doesn't, there probably needs to be some other things that need to be looked at to reduce volume. But, as part of the overall picture, if they had not discarded those high values, and then, and similarly keep, they also kept slower values that were, would be considered outliers as well, but they did factor those in. The infiltration systems might have a smaller footprint, not like dramatically smaller, but they could be like, 10% smaller, just off the top of my head. That would be the, type of order of magnitude. Another thing, but this is, this is in fact required by regulation, is that on top of the infiltration rates that they measured, they did apply a 50% factor of safety. Again, that's required by that is required by the state, and also the town requires it. And what that does, that allows, for the potential of clogging over time. Right, although there are some upstream measures like the gross particle separators or the catch basin sumps, there's still going to be some particles that will get through, and over time, the accumulation of those particles will slow down the infiltration. So at least out of the gate, these systems will probably perform better than what's calculated. So that was like the one of the primary levels of the applicant being conservative. That's that the infiltration rates was like the example that came immediately to mind.
So if that's Sanford again. So if I were to rephrase what you just said, is in doing the measuring, which is effectively an experiment, when some of the outliers that were high were discarded, while some of the ones that were low were not. So it kind of adhered to what they were hoping to get out of the measure.
No, what it was, right, when you measure it, right, for it to be advantageous, right, it needs to be fast. But so by taking the outlying fast measures and discarding them and not including them in the average, right, while keeping the outlying values that were slow in the average, right, so that's factored into the overall measurement, into the computation. Sorry, so of the infiltration rate. So they factored in the average rate, the rates that were average, as well as the rate that was very slow, but they did not include the rate that was very fast in our calculation.
So as a result, the average is lower than it would if they were to include those higher.
Right, that's correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
I actually had a question for the town engineer, but I don't want to stop anybody else asking a question of Joe Canis. Thank you. So,
Just identify
oh,
yourself.
sorry, this is for the record, this is Angela Jameson. Ms. Coplet, could you elaborate on your comments about the increase in runoff volume, specifically what that might mean for the wetlands? Because that's what we have to focus on here. It is the wetlands and whether there could be an adverse impact or not.
Well, one of the issues, the reason why I raised is because Joe had mentioned whether or not you would explore a waiver on that. And so the way that the model right now, the engineering model is that you have an area that's a point of concern from the project. And from that point of concern, it discharges into the wetlands based on the model. So there is both an increase in volume in both the point of concern and in the wetlands. And what that means for the wetland and the wetland quality itself is not the issue of where my comment is. Where my comment was raised was whether or not you were to consider a waiver from something that, since I have been engineer, I have not really diverted from, that I've always maintained that runoff volume needs to meet existing conditions. And that is because of adjacent flooding concerns. And so that comment was raised not because of the wetland itself, but because of the adjacent neighbors and known flooding concerns.
Right, but specifically as it relates to the wetlands, that's what the Inland Wetland Commission, rather than P&Z, has to focus on. So are you saying that these increases in volume would have an adverse impact on the wetlands?
No, based on the applicant's report, it's a modest increase in surface elevation at the wetlands. Again, the reason why I mention is because it is not currently consistent with our drainage policy. So if the Inland Wetlands Commission were to divert from that or create a waiver from that, I just want to address what my concerns are regarding that.
Angela Jameson, again for the record. So it sounds from what you're saying that in your professional capacity, you think it would be better not to grant a waiver from that requirement.
Correct.
Thank you.
Angela, Kathleen Holland, for the record, you may be able to have a follow-up question once Michael Klein, who did attend in person here, starts to speak, because he would be the correct. So
Thank
hold,
you.
hold that question for the next speaker.
Christopher Smith, Attorney Smith, you understand, I don't want you to answer anything right now, but you understand the questions, the comments, you need any elaboration from him at all?
So good, I don't, Mr. Chairman, for the record, Chris.
You're okay. Okay.
And for the record, one last thing from Maria Coplet, similar to what Joe said, if the applicant is in agreement to address these comments and take on the responsibility for, hopefully no major change to the plan, that they would then present them back before your commission, we would have no concerns with our comments being conditions of approval.
All right, thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, George Perkins for the record. You indicated on number 14 on page 19, the segment of the PVC drain has a 45-degree angle in it. I know from experience that angles can cause problems, but with 8 inches, not too much can get into it, and would be a fairly simple thing for to cause a clog. Do you think 8 inches is sufficient for this?
Again, for the record, Joseph Canis, and my concern, anytime you have a bend in a pipe, it's there is a potential for clogging. The catch basin, yard drain upstream. I don't recall the design if it has a trap on it. So basically an inverted elbow, which prevents, debris from getting into the pipe. It's probably less of a concern, provided, I know the yard drain does have a sump, but, it all speaks to maintenance. If that sump is full, that drain hasn't been maintained, it's more of, there's more of a chance of it getting clogged. From my perspective, I just think that, it's better to try to eliminate any bends or anything like that. Like, when you can, it's just one less thing to maintain, one less thing to worry about. You get easier access to the pipe when you do need to clean it. But that said, in this situation, the chances of clogging are pretty low. There's no requirement that a structure be put on every bend. I think just for me, it's the way I've always done things, and it's a matter of good practice. But ultimately, it's the applicant that is responsible to maintain it. And if they're comfortable with having a bend there, it's a minor bend on a fairly 8 inches of not a small pipe, but that's up to the applicant. I was just thinking, in terms of making the site easier to maintain. The easier things are to maintain, the better they perform.
George Perkins again for the record. Would you recommend a maintenance schedule of flushing these pipes on a regular basis or annual or semi-annual?
I would recommend cleaning, not, and the frequency, would depend on how quickly sediment accumulates in them. One of the things, these discharge to wetlands, so you don't want to, constantly be pumping them with water. Right. So you want to, you want to strike a good balance between maintaining a clean system and, obviously not, putting, if, for example, if you're using tap water and water from the hose, right, which has chlorine in it, you certainly don't want to be doing that on a regular basis either. So, you got to find that right happy medium. But the applicant has prepared a stormwater maintenance and operations plan, and we've reviewed it, and we did have a couple minor comments on that in this letter. Again, that pertain to the ladder and be, access down to some of the more inaccessible reaches of the system.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, thank you. You will stick around for a while. right?
I will stick around, but I will watch my step as I leave here. We don't lose video again. Right, thank you.
All right, our next peer reviewer is Michael Klein. And he's in the audience. Yep.
Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Michael Klein. I'm a biologist and a soil scientist. My office is in West Hartford. I also have giant feet, so hopefully I won't disable the system here.
You can move all.
take your
you can
shoes
move to
off.
the end chair if you're more comfortable.
That's a good idea.
Absolutely fine.
Is this mic work?
That's the mic that will pick you up. You can leave it. right where it
I
is.
see the blue light. There we
Yep,
go.
it's all
Okay.
set.
So I've submitted a letter dated the 24th. It's 13 pages long. I'm not going to read it. Thought that I might do is focus on the comments or concerns that are still outstanding. But if anyone has any questions about those in which I've indicated that the concern has been addressed or the comment has been addressed, I'd be happy to discuss that with the commission. I organized my comments in the opposite order that Mr. Canis did. So I first included my comments on the revised plan set that we received on February 20th.
So what page is that on?
That's right on the first page.
Oh.
Um,
Oh, I see. Okay.
There is a note on the plans that requires testing to confirm the infiltration rates for the pervious driveway pavement. I think that's laudable. But I also think that that note should apply to the stormwater infiltration system. That the ability of that system to operate as designed is critical to protection of the wetland system. Second comment, there is a drain in the northwest corner of the site in the erosion sediment control plan. It shows a temporary storm drain. It crosses the Hall Road and the temporary diversion swale. I didn't see any indication on the plan to confirm that there wouldn't be a conflict when it crosses, that it should have adequate clearance to go underneath those features. As Joe mentioned, the temporary sediment traps don't continue all the way through the later phases of the project. I believe they're
Excuse
not-
me, George Perkins for the record. Could you speak up just a little bit?
oh, sure. Is it the microphone that, or just talk louder?
Talk
Oh,
louder.
Okay. The temporary sediment traps that are shown in the first two phases aren't shown in the later phases. And I believe they're required at least for phase 3. We had a comment about showing an impervious fueling and maintenance pad for the construction equipment to collect and treat any drippings and stormwater that might be contaminated. They were shown in the earlier phases again, but not in the later phases. And there's no detail shown of what that impervious pad would look like. I think that should be included in the plan. As Joe mentioned, based on some of both his comments and mine, there is a diversion swale shown at the top of the rock cut. My concern in recommending that some measure to control stormwater was confined to the construction phase. The swale does address that, but it also could perhaps just be addressed with a temporary berm. The inclusion of that swale in the design now requires grading and cutting to within just a few feet of the intermittent water course along the eastern boundary of the site. If just a berm is used, I don't believe that amount of grading is required, which would allow for maintaining a larger setback from the construction to the intermittent water course, would require removal of less vegetation. And it is one of the recommendations that was in Bill Kenny's report, seems to have a concern about the relationship of that grading to that water course area. It was unclear in the reports that and in the plans, whether those recommendations that he made had been included, addressed in the plans. His report very specifically says that his conclusions about no adverse impacts on wetlands are based on having those recommendations implemented. So I think that needs to be clarified. On page 2 of my report, there is a somewhat lengthy comment regarding the wetland delineation. I had requested some updating of that. It's unclear to me exactly what was done. However, the differences are pretty small and would be unlikely to have an impact on whether the wetlands are affected or not. That's an issue that I think is generally not good practice to incorporate a wetland line that is merged between two different consultants, but it may not be a significant concern for this commission. That's really a decision, I think, for you to make. I finally received a copy of the environment. Moving on to the next set of comments, again at the sort of the middle of page 2, I'd requested and finally received wetland planting plans from Environmental Land Solutions that were apparently approved in the past when the driveway was constructed. There is a concern about the date. The drawings that I received are not the same date as was referenced in some of the materials. There may be no difference, changes may have been minor, but the ones I got were dated in June of 2018. And I think the reference in some of the other materials from the applicant was April of 2019. Why that may be a concern or maybe not a concern is that the plans, the ELS plans address plantings and mitigation activities associated with a 16-foot wide driveway. The driveway in the current plans is 20 feet wide. That may or may not affect the way this planting plan was set up, this mitigation plan was set up. For example, the plan shows plantings on the south side of the intermittent water course that runs along the or near the southern boundary of the site. Seems to me that there currently really isn't any access to that area because the driveway has been built. And I would note that the plan required that the wetland creation work be completed, and this is an exact quote, in conjunction with the driveway grading and installation of the culvert, end quote, and prior to the issuance of a building permit. Doesn't appear that that has been done. May or may not have a significant impact, but it's a concern to understand how this plan, the ELS plans from 2018, 2019 relate to the 2023 plans. I've recommended that a note be added to the plans that any invasive plant material disposal comply with the DEP guidelines. There's some conflicts between the notes in the Kenny plan and the notes in the ELS plan. So I think that needs to be resolved. Purple loosestrife is a major invader in wetlands in Connecticut, and that is not identified as a plant that would be controlled in the ELS plans. Actually, I don't think it's also mentioned in the Kenny plan, so that needs to be put in there. The last comment in that series of bullets is one that I've made in several places. We've requested an estimate for the cost of the construction, the wetland mitigation construction and monitoring. I've requested that for several other elements of this plan. I think you should, it may be appropriate for you to consult with your town attorney, but those estimates for bonding purposes, the applicant's position is they would be provided after approval. There are limitations on the items that you can place as conditions of approval. I think that it would be prudent to have those estimates examined so that you can arrive at an accurate bonding amount. By having them occur post approval, that may or may not, it may affect your ability to review and confirm the adequacy of the bonding amounts. Next comment, group of comments, there's two of them have to do with the Kenny Associates wetland buffer enhancement planting plan. There are some conflicts between the Kenny plan and the ELS plans. I think those should be resolved. There are buffer plantings shown east and north of the rock cut. This is what we were talking about before in terms of in the vicinity of the this diversion swale. And the grading of that diversion swale conflicts with some of the buffer plantings that are shown. I think that's what Mr. Kenny was talking about when he suggested some modifications, but that needs to be resolved. The next category of comments in my letter, really starting on page 3, we're examining the responses that the applicant gave to our review memos. In cases where we agree that the comment has been adequately addressed, I don't think I need to get into that in any detail in interest of time unless the commission would like that. So my first comment was one that I mentioned before about the wetland boundary line. As I said, I think it's a matter of for the commission's discretion as to whether they want to address that. The next comment has to do with the dates of the plans from Environmental Land Solutions for wetland mitigation. I think that needs to be resolved. I have a comment regarding the invasive species control element of the Kenny plan and the ELS plan as well. This is a difficult question in some ways because it's a relatively small site. It's in a developed landscape, and invasive control under those circumstances are difficult. But I would note that the plan as it's laid out is somewhat generic. There's no identification of success criteria. There it talks about monitoring the implementation of the plan or the success of the plan, but there's no success criteria shown. So we don't know how to judge whether the plan is successful or not. There's no indication of timing or specific control measures. There are some of the, I agree that herbicide control is most likely required in this circumstance. The only herbicide that's mentioned in here, glyphosate, is a non-specific herbicide, yet the plan says use specific herbicides as much as possible. So I think that there needs to be more definition in this plan. There is Phragmites and Japanese knotweed at the site, and there is mention about grubbing out those species. That is not a successful method of removing those species. They regrow from fragments of rhizomes and tubers very, very successfully. The Kenny plan notes talk about have a different time frame than for monitoring than the ELS plans. I think the 5-year time frame shown in the ELS plans is appropriate. I would recommend that any approval that might occur here would have a 5-year time frame for monitoring the invasives as well as the compensatory wetland creation area. Again, bonding estimates, I think, need to be provided. They were suggested that they would be put in as a condition of approval. That's the bottom of page 3. And on to page 4. The erosion control plan, additional detail has been provided, as I mentioned earlier on in my discussion tonight. There are some additional issues that need to be addressed. In general, the additional detail is substantial, but there are some minor tweaks that we think are required. The bottom of page 4 and the top of page 5 talks about the diversion swale that we've discussed already. There is a mention of the rock cut, and the applicant has presented a report from GZA 2017 report on designing the walls and the cuts on this site. There's a recommendation in that report that those be designed in accordance with or designed by an appropriate professional. The applicant, I think, should indicate if that was in fact the case. I didn't see anything in the revised plan set that indicated that, but it may be true. Excuse me. The cost of implementing and maintaining the sediment erosion controls is a significant element here, and is critical to preventing adverse impacts to the wetlands. Again, we've asked for a bond estimate so that it could be reviewed. The applicant's position is that it be provided prior to the start of construction. I think it would be appropriate, and the same thing is true with respect to the stormwater management system and the long-term maintenance. I think it would be prudent to consult with your town attorney and determine if these kind of after approval additions or supplementations are appropriate. As I said, I know there are some court decisions that address the extent to which you can make conditions of approval. I had made a comment, this is on top of page 6. I had made a comment that when I was at the site, I saw that there was surface flow along the base of the retaining wall. I believe the intention of the plan was always that the intermittent water course flows under in a culvert under the driveway, and that it was to disperse back into the wetland overall rather than channel along the side of the retaining wall. The applicant has proposed placing some soil in that area to move the flow or divert the flow back into the wetland. I'm not sure that that's the best alternative, but it because it requires placing some fill in the wetland. If that's the only viable alternative, then I think it can be done without a significant impact if it's done carefully under the supervision of a wetland scientist and is stabilized with a wetland seed mix.
So your best alternative would be get together with a scientist, is that right? To help him do. Well, kind of explain that. What's
Sure.
another alternative to that?
Well, I don't know what the alternatives are. It's not really the commission or your consultant's job to do the design. When somebody says we're going to rectify a problem by putting some additional fill in the area, as I was a regulator for many years in the town in which I lived at the time. So that just raises an alarm bell in my mind. If it's done carefully, it can probably be done without a significant impact. I don't know what other alternatives there are, but it's just something to consider.
Okay.
The next comment that I had about that there was extensive multiflora rose out of the site, and that should be part of the invasive control plan. And again, same comment as I made before, that there are some additional detail that, in my opinion, is required in the invasive control plan. Next comment is number 12 on that page. I've suggested you may want to hire or require a third-party inspector to verify compliance. The applicant's position talks about a single site monitor. I'm not really sure what that means. A single site monitor. If the responsibilities and requirements of construction monitoring and inspection are specifically spelled out, that may be appropriate. It was unclear to me what that meant. Next few comments were adequately addressed. On page 7, we're now on to another review memo. So the comments were numbered starting again from the beginning, and it was talking about using silt sock rather than core logs. And the plans do indicate now my recommendation of using a silt sock or preferred equal. I think the only additional clarification in that regard is it should indicate it's continuous. It's been my experience that the joining of discrete silt sock or erosion control socks is often a real weak link in the process when they're installed. Silt sock is a specific commercial product. I'm sure there are others out there, or maybe there aren't, but there likely are others out there. But that allows for a continuous sock because it comes in 100-foot lengths, but you can sleeve one inside the other and it's blown in place. So it creates one continuous barrier, which I think in this case, given the proximity of such a significant amount of construction close to the edge of a wetland is called for. It's just a minor adjustment to the notes in that regard. The next comment on page 7, number 3, was asking for some additional detail on the green roof. And they do provide the area of the green roof in the architectural plans. It is an integral element of the stormwater management plan. I'm not a structural engineer. I'm not an architect. My educated layperson's understanding is that these are fairly complex systems. And so I don't know whether the information that's presented is adequate or not to demonstrate the feasibility of that. Credit is taken in the stormwater management plan for the performance of the green roof. So you may wish to consult with your town engineer or other appropriate professional to make that decision. Next page, on page 8, there's a comments that are adequately addressed in terms of the basins. The fueling and maintenance location we've already discussed. I think provided that there's adequate space for it in the later phases of the phased plan and the detail is provided, then I think that would be adequate. The issue of acid drainage is, I think, quite appropriately addressed. I do have some concerns about the amount of rock that's being crushed and the impact of runoff from the rock crusher. There's their applicant's position in that regard was to show stone filter berms. The rock flour that comes from crushing rock is extremely fine, and that may not be adequate. Stone filter berm may require some kind of a graded filter that has finer filtering capacity. The next comment in which next comment number 7 is adequately addressed with respect to impacts of snow and ice removal. Number 8, the preformed scour hole. This is immediately west or northwesterly of the culvert in the existing driveway. The intention of that comment was to reorient the scour hole so that the long axis is parallel to the slope. The applicant took my comment quite literally, that they just changed the downstream end of it so that it's parallel to the slope. I'd prefer that the entire scour hole be reoriented so that the discharge is spread out over and along the slope rather than concentrating. With respect to the next series of comments that were in our third review memo number 1, is a discussion about whether the swirl concentrators should be online or offline. The applicant's position is that because this is relatively small drainage areas, that inline is perfectly adequate. I think that's an engineering decision that your town engineer and your consulting engineer should weigh in on. Defer to their judgment. The next series of comments on page 10 have to do with the wetland functions and values assessment in the Kenny report. And I recommended using a different methodology, the highway method. I'm not sure that the highway method was applied appropriately. There's an appendix to the report that goes through all 13 functions and values in that highway method, but the table that's in the report only addresses 8 of them. It looks at those impacts in a qualitative fashion, describing functions as being low, medium, or high, and if there's remain within that category. The conclusion appears to be that there is no adverse effect. That is that's not the way the highway method is designed to be used. It is a technique that many people used in the past, but it's become outdated. And I think you heard a lot of testimony from Mr. Liebman for the intervener about recognizing wetland values as being important, even if the wetlands are have been degraded somewhat. I think that's where this goes. Ultimately, the decision is there a significant adverse impact on the wetland? And that can be arrived at, that decision can be arrived at without looking at it in the manner that it was done in the Kenny report. I think that technique tends to obscure small impacts because it's not a reproducible method, because what someone says is moderate value for a certain function is not reproducible across different, it's a personal opinion, if you will. And I think that issue will become clarified a little bit as I talk in the next section of my report, which is starting on bottom of page 10 and moves on from there, which is my comments on the intervener's submittal and testimony. And we agree, I agree with the intervener's comments with respect to that the approach utilized in the stormwater management plan is conceptually sound. I agree also that failure of the stormwater control measures or the erosion and sediment control measures would adversely affect the wetlands downstream. I think the critical question here is has the long-term performance of those systems, either both during construction and after construction, been adequately addressed. We completely agree that the intervener's position that stormwater discharged too quickly from the infiltration systems would not be fully treated. So that's one of the reasons why I've requested that in addition to verifying the capacity of the driveway to infiltrate stormwater, that's also critical to verify the design assumptions for the infiltration systems from the stormwater management plan, not just from the driveway, but those underground systems. It's important to verify that they are constructed as designed and work as anticipated. I disagree with the interveners with respect to the water seeping from the rock cut. I don't think that that has a reasonable likelihood of causing water pollution. It's a generic point they've raised. Surface water is more susceptible to contamination than groundwater. That's true, but in this case, there's no reason to believe that that groundwater that seeps out of the rock face and is collected is going to be subject to contamination. We agree with the intervener that the erosion and sedimentation during construction poses the greatest potential adverse impact on the regulated resources. There is a significant amount of additional detail that's been provided. We have made some comments as to some ways that that additional detail can be improved. The intervener had some comments about snow and ice removal. With respect to the physical elements of that plan, you heard from the engineer about whether there's enough space and whether that affects parking. That's not within my area of jurisdiction. I think the use of the environmentally friendly de-icer is important. The question that I think you have to consider is how do you enforce that moving forward? And this is a decision or a question that has had several people both on the consulting side and on the regulating side scratching their heads, is how do we guarantee that these complex systems are maintained in the future and properly monitored. Like my suggestion is that the applicant provide you with some very specific programs to make sure that that happens. My opinion is that's something that you need to review as part of your deliberations. There was a concern, though, again, about the de-icing agents. I don't think that's a significant concern. There are some species that are sensitive to salts and other products. In this particular case, I don't think that's no indication that the resources on the site are particularly sensitive. There's also really no practical method to remove these things. They're dissolved in water, whether it's rock salt or CMA or any other product, urea or whatever. Once it's dissolved in the water, there's really no practical way to remove it from stormwater, short of some kind of elaborate chemical treatment plant. We do agree that with the intervener's position that the approved 2-lot subdivision is a feasible alternative. Feasible meaning technically capable of being done. It clearly is. You've approved it. The applicant has presented it. The area of tree and vegetation removal substantially increases from that alternative to the current proposal. The question that I'm not going to be able to give you any guidance on, but I'm going to tell you that I think it's part of your job to consider is whether it's the most prudent alternative. The statute and the regulations and the case law all describe, feasible is technically capable of being done. Prudent is a weighing, a balancing test between the benefits, social and otherwise, of the proposed project versus the impacts. And that's a weighing. That's unfortunately for you guys, that's your job, not mine at this point in time. We don't agree with the intervener's request that or suggestion that you require a arborist to make a detailed inventory of all the trees, calculate the biomass. But it is within your discretion to require any additional information you think is necessary to make an informed decision. The interveners raise a question about lighting and its impact. That is a question that can be easily answered by submission of a photometric plan. It's not unusual for that to be submitted. And it would answer that question quite clearly. There are lots of ways to reduce light spread by designating very specific kinds of lighting fixtures. So I think that's something that could easily be done. In conclusion, I guess I would note that many of our concerns and comments have been addressed. There are some unresolved issues. I would summarize that this is a highly engineered development that requires a significant construction effort, proper implementation and ongoing maintenance of the stormwater controls during and after construction are critical to protect the wetland and water courses from avoidable indirect adverse impacts, and that adequate financial guarantees should be in place to ensure long-term operation and maintenance of the system. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, this is Dan. After listening to you, it sounds like I get the feeling that there's not enough information provided here, or the information that they have, a lot of it is outdated. You use that term. And or not thorough enough. And I guess that would come from lack of information. Is that a fair assessment?
I was anxiously awaiting responses to the comments that we made. We made them as the hearing process moved along. We made them prior to the first hearing. I think that I'll say I was disappointed to get a package on the 20th of February that was this thick, because I anticipated that there would be some back and forth that would be required to resolve some of these things. These things usually aren't. These are complex issues, and they're usually not resolved in one round of back and forth, in my experience over the last 40 years. It puts the commission in the position of perhaps of considering whether the conditions of approval that would be necessary to resolve those comments are something that you're comfortable with. There are some, as I mentioned, some conflicts between some of the plans that I think should have been could have been looked at earlier. Again, if we'd gotten a response earlier. I know there's pressure on people not to be making a continuous series of revisions, because that creates difficulties also. But I would have hoped that we would have had these responses sooner, so that more of these things could be cleared up.
Any questions? Anyone?
This is George Perkins for the record. On page 6 at the top of the page, you indicated, can you tell me what short circuiting means to you? Does that mean that the water is flowing around and not following the path of the Five River, or can you tell me a little bit about what
Sure.
you mean by short circuiting?
Yeah, maybe that wasn't the best, the most artful term. My understanding of the intention of the culvert construction and the driveway construction was that the intermittent water course that flows along the eastern side of the site, which there's at least a reasonable likelihood that that was a constructed channel, or the water was diverted around, so it didn't just flow straight across through the center of the property as sheet flow. My understanding is that the intention was that that culvert would, that flow would not be channelized along the edge of the driveway, that it would disperse out into the wetland to mimic the pre-construction conditions. I don't think that that's happened. It looked to me like the water was all just concentrated along the toe of that wall. Whether that's an issue for the integrity of the wall, I have no idea. But from the standpoint of the wetland, you'd want to have that flow dispersed as sheet flow to maintain the hydrology of the wetland. I noted that there was some vegetative response to that channeling along the toe of the wall. So I think that that's that's something that I'd like to see avoided. I think there's, probably a number of different ways that could happen. And the applicant has suggested one.
Thank you.
For the record, Angela Jameson, Mr. Klein, thank you for all your detailed comments and requests for additional information. There are a lot of them, but can you just summarize for us what you see as the likely impact on the hydrology of the wetlands as a result of one, construction, and then two, the actual development as it will be? How is that likely to actually impact, in layman's terms, what those wetlands look like and what they do for the environment?
I think that if the plans are implemented, if the intent of the plans is realized, I think the impacts will be relatively minor. At this point in time, my concern is that there are additional elements that should be represented in the plans to give a higher degree of confidence that over the long term that these measures will function.
So just to follow up on that, that's always the $20 million question, isn't it? What happens in the long term? You've got a plan. It's got lots of details. As it's been said, it may be conceptually sound, but then there can be a difference between that and the actual reality that occurs in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, more than that. And we've all seen that sometimes what appeared to be conceptually sound hasn't quite worked out as everybody had intended. The risk of unforeseen consequences. What's your picture of what could possibly happen over the next decade or so?
Well, yeah, I mean, all systems require maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
Some systems are designed to be largely passive, and some systems require more in terms of maintenance, and some systems require more active intervention. I think the level of complexity, as that rises, the likelihood of an unintended effect increases, which is why I've urged that or commented that you have a very robust system of bonding and monitoring in place if this project is to be approved. Forever is a long time. I'm not the first person who ever said that. It is a conundrum within the current regulatory system. I will admit that. In the past, when people were designing a stormwater basin that functioned to treat the stormwater, was a surface basin, and it had sumps in it where wetland vegetation would develop and so forth. That, that's sort of a pretty resilient kind of a system when you're relying on measures that are underground and require careful long-term maintenance. It's a little more difficult to ensure the long-term viability of those systems. In projects that are dense have a higher likelihood of requiring those complex systems.
Yes, hi, Beth Sanford, for the record. One of the things that stood out which you spoke about was the whole way of assessing the impact on the wetlands and the methodology that was used, the highway method, which you kind of called old-fashioned. And what I understand is that in order to evaluate the site disturbance, where there's going to be the rock cut and how it's going to affect the eastern wetlands and watercourse, that the 13 supposed functions, only 8 were evaluated, and it's kind of in a subjective way to see what the impact is what I read here and what I heard you say. And in terms of figuring out what the measure is and what the potential impact is to the wetlands, so it's not a quantitative study that you can kind of use to evaluate what the end result will be.
This comment, like the comment about the wetland delineation, may be illustrating my personal prejudice, if you will, in terms of appropriate process. They're all 13 functions and values were identified in the appendix. The goal or the result of a highway method should be the identification of what are principal functions and values. That does require an exercise of judgment, but the highway method has a whole series of indicators that you look at. And as the number of those indicators for any one particular function and value that are present at the site go up, the likelihood that it's a principal function increases. So again, I'm not sure that it would change the conclusions, but it's a prejudice of mine that procedure be followed. I think what you've heard me say is that if everything were to operate precisely as designed, there's probably not a significant impact, but that I have concerns about the reliance on this complex system. So I spent a fair amount of time in my report talking about this, and maybe that overemphasized the significance of this to the bottom line, which I think I presented as I reached my conclusions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is Dan again. You say, I wrote this down here. You say it's highway method is outdated. What would you have used?
Oh, no, the highway method isn't outdated. I think the application of it was outdated in terms of using these low, moderate, and high level of function. No, the highway method is the de facto standard in New England. It was developed by the Corps of Engineers and the Federal Highway Administration, and has become, it's an extension of other methods that I will admit, it's clear, you know, quite honestly, that we used many, many years ago. But this is now an evolution of that method. It's not brand new. It's been around for, I don't know, 20 years or so. But the evolution of the application of that method has moved away from identifying a function as being provided at a moderate or low or high level. It's just been principal function or not.
So are you saying that other things are more important now than they were?
No, I'm just saying, I mean, the concern I have is more theoretical than actual, that by saying that a particular function is provided at a moderate level under present circumstances, and it'll be provided at a moderate level under future conditions, doesn't mean that there's no impact. I think that's the concern I have, is that it obscures small or medium-sized impacts, and it relies to a very high degree on the judgment of the person who's doing the work.
How about bonding? You brought bonding up quite a bit in your report here. How would that work? I mean,
Well, I don't, you know, different towns do that in different ways. In my judgment, the idea of the bond is to ensure that the work is done properly, and to ensure that if the project goes south at some point, that the resources can be restored or protected. And so in order to have that happen, you need to know how much these things are going to cost.
and that should be in the plan, is that right? How much?
In my opinion, yes. We've asked for those amounts, and the computations for how they're calculated. There are, you know, the devil's in the details. Some municipalities do that all in the planning and zoning process. Some do it in the building permit process. My personal opinion is that you can be done in any one of those ways, but you're a wetland commission, and the measures that are necessary to protect the wetland are certainly within your jurisdiction to decide that they should be, you know, financially guaranteed. If your typical procedure is to do it elsewise, you know, that's fine.
I have a follow-up question to Kathleen Holland for the record. You seem to have broken down suggestion for bonding per activity. It felt like, can you just reiterate the 2 or 3 major categories that you were considering?
Yeah.
Should have more details.
It's not unusual to have an erosion and sediment control bond. That's often, but not always, implemented through the wetland agency. So that's one element. The implementation of the wetland creation, wetland mitigation, wetland buffer area plantings would be an area. That could be rolled in also with invasive management. That's kind of a integral element of certainly of wetland creation and wetland mitigation designs is invasive management. So that could be rolled in together. And then the third element in my mind is the long-term performance of the stormwater management system. And I will admit that I don't, I'm not I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how all these things come together in terms of those things that are supposed to be done in perpetuity. The erosion sediment control bond, once it's, once those measures, the site is stabilized, that's done. The invasive and plant mitigation plantings, once you achieve a 5-year period with success, I think the plan needs to elucidate what the success criteria are, but once you've achieved that, that's done. The last element is one that I suspect there'll be a lot of discussions about moving forward, not only in front of this commission, but lots of other commissions. I know it's a subject of consideration by my colleagues.
And what is that?
Oh, the long-term performance
Long-term
of the
performance.
stormwater system.
Thank you. That's helpful. Yeah, I mean, it's a complex project. The soil and erosion control bond seems pretty appropriate, and as do the others, should the discussion move forward. And I am brief, a lot of memos came in today, so I was re-looking at the town engineers memo. Not necessarily a bond, but some additional details on legality and maintenance agreements and things of that nature. So those sort of tie together.
Yes.
Some of the bond results.
Do you have any, this is Dan again, do you have any comments on, and this is not, I hate to say this is not probably a wetlands thing, the sturdiness of the bridge? Is that out of your,
Way out of my,
okay.
way out of my
Okay.
expertise for sure.
Okay.
I think there is an analysis in some of the, well, I don't know if it addresses the culvert. There is an analysis of the some of the material that we came in over the weekend that looks at structural stability. I read it. I have no idea what it means.
That's probably planning and zoning, but if you get a 200-year storm or something, it may be strong enough to do damage to that bridge and obviously affect the wetlands, that type of thing. So,
Yeah, I think that's a question for your town engineer.
yeah. Any other questions? Nothing?
Anthony Sillo, just in your opinion, would you say that you mentioned some water standing at the bottom of the, I guess, bridge or boulder wall, whatever we're calling it? Is that affected the wetlands at all that you've seen already or currently?
I've seen, well, it's hard to be precise because I haven't been out there during the growing season. But it appears that there's some vegetative response. I think I saw some cattails and maybe some phragmites also in that area, right along the toe of that, the base of that wall, which probably weren't there in the past, based on what I could determine. It wasn't extensive, but it was present.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. So, we want to take a break? Anybody, about 5 minutes? Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. Meet back here at 8:15. The second order of presentations are the interveners and Attorney Shapiro. You have the microphone.
Good evening, members of the commission. Jonathan Shapiro from Aton Law Partners. Here on behalf of the interveners, Mark Durkin, Jeffrey Stein, and the New Canaan Residents Against Destructive Development. We're going to try to keep our presentation relatively brief tonight. We're going to start with Mr. Sandola from SE Minor to address some of the follow-up materials received by the applicant.
Good evening, everybody. For the record, Robert Sandolo from SE Minor. We reviewed the revised and supplemental materials that were submitted by the applicant. While our review is ongoing, it was a lot of material to get through, and the applicant responded to certain concerns and comments that were raised. It's our professional opinion that they failed to address all of the concerns, and that significant deficiencies and open items remain. It remains our opinion that the proposed development will have an adverse impact on the wetland and upland areas. Moreover, without sufficiently addressing the remaining open items, it's also our opinion that it's not possible to completely and adequately assess the efficacy of the proposed plan and the full extent of the impacts it will have. The proposed development does not meet the town of New Canaan drainage policy, which clearly states, and that Maria Coppola also stated, that there shall be no increase in peak flow rates or runoff volumes in the post-development condition. The proposed development will increase peak flows in the one-year storm. Although CTDP does not require reductions in peak flow in the one-year storm, this increase is not negligible, and given the specific circumstances of this project, it is our professional opinion that this increase will result in an adverse impact to the wetland and upland areas. It will result in more sedimentation and erosion, so that's more deposit of fine sediments and erosion of the wetland and upland area, and exacerbate existing flooding conditions. The proposed development will also increase runoff volumes in the one-year storm by nearly 3,000 cubic feet. It is our professional opinion that the increase is unacceptable and will adversely impact the wetlands. As previously discussed, if a wetland is inundated with more water than it is accustomed to, this can be just as detrimental as a lack of water. Basically drown out what's already there. There are significant increases in runoff volumes in the 1 through 25-year design storms. These are all relatively, the 25-year storm is a large storm, but it's relatively commonly occurring. And with more water, we're going to have adverse impacts to the wetlands for the reasons we just stated. The applicant responded to our concerns about the groundwater discharge from the rock cut. And while we agree that the groundwater is relatively clean and the increase in peak flows is negligible, we do stand by our opinion that there's an increased risk of the groundwater that's picked up in the proposed stormwater system becoming polluted. And the reason we say this is because once you have a catch basin and piping network, over time, these catch basins are going to capture and trap pollutants as they're meant to, and without proper maintenance, especially, that clean groundwater is going to get into these catch basins pick up pollutants and make its way through the wetland. The applicant has failed to address our concerns regarding the structural integrity of the retaining wall. And its relationship with the proposed infiltration behind it. In our professional opinion, the proposed design of having a mortared stone wall with a dry laid stone footing is very unusual and may not be structurally sound. They had a report by GZA was submitted that evaluated basically the movement of the infiltrated water through that ungrouted stone footing. But the report didn't actually analyze the structural integrity of the wall with regard to sliding and overturning. And it also made no analysis or assumptions of the internal stability of the wall, being that, so the upper half of the wall or the exposed portion of the wall will be mortared, but the foundation of this stone wall will be dry laid. So the report made no conclusions if that design is actually structurally stable. As we stated previously, the retaining wall has a reasonably likelihood of failing, resulting in an adverse impact to the wetlands, either through the discharge of polluted runoff or the structural failure of the wall itself. We also agree with the town of New Canaan Fire Marshal in that the proposed development does not allow for adequate site access, specifically for emergency responders. And well, we've heard this before. The reason this is relevant is that any additional access would likely require an additional wetland crossing. So if addressing that comment means an additional crossing, then that isn't on the plans now. We can't really adequately assess the impacts. And similarly, given the nature of the project, we feel that pedestrian access or separate pedestrian access, not down the driveway, is warranted here, and that would also that could also require an additional wetland crossing. A couple of discrepancies we found, just for an example, the plan set and the construction phasing plan stated that the retaining wall, the western retaining wall, would be constructed in phase 3. But the response letter to Davidson Environmental stated that the retaining walls will be constructed in phase 1. Also, the memo prepared by Solely Engineering stated that rock will be blasted and removed section by section from the front to the rear. However, the construction phasing plans showed the opposite, where it would be blasted and removed from the rear to the front. So just inconsistencies in the overall plan do not allow for a full and proper evaluation of the project. The proposed rock cut and sheer rock face is an attractive nuisance and poses a significant risk to public safety and general welfare. This may not be a direct wetland impact, but it's definitely something worth mentioning. Overall, the proposed grading plan is not reflective of the town of New Canaan's grading guidelines that are outlined in section 6.4 of the zoning regulations. The construction of the newly proposed swale along the top of the proposed rock cut will require earthwork and tree removals in close proximity in 3, 4, or 5 feet of the wetland. And this will constitute an adverse impact to the wetland, because when you're constructing that thing, depending on how it's constructed, whether they use a berm or cut in a swale, you're going to have disturbance in very close proximity to the wetland itself. On a related note, the applicant has not provided sizing calculations for that swale to show that it can actually handle the anticipated flows that are coming from north of the project and being diverted around. So if it's not sized appropriately, then obviously it wouldn't function as intended. I also feel that given that there's sort of so many different planting plans floating around, there's the plans that need to be that are supposed to be implemented for the driveway, the wetland enhancement plans by both Kenny and the landscape plans by Solely. We feel that, again, to ensure that all these things are implemented properly, that a single sort of comprehensive tree removals and planting plan should be produced to ensure that it's all done appropriately and correctly. In our opinion, the proposed snow removal and management plan is not realistically practical. The plan, as stated previously, the plan eliminates 15 parking spaces and turnaround spaces. In reality, if these spaces are occupied by cars, when you get a big snow event, can't put the snow there, so inevitably you're going to end up pushing the snow into vegetated areas where you'll now have untreated snow melt running off into the wetlands. Where, you know, the intent of storing it on pavement is when it melts, it gets into the stormwater system. So if those spaces are occupied by cars, you can't do that. It's unclear if the proposed guardrail will require further modification to the access drive and retaining walls, and thereby further impact to the wetlands. That's been an issue that's been raised a couple of times, and we feel the same. It's also worth mentioning that we did review all the memos produced by Joseph Canis, Klein, and obviously Maria Coplit's memos, and we strongly agree with all of the concerns that were raised there. So overall, we feel that the application remains lacking the level of detail and analysis that is warranted by a project of this magnitude. The applicant failed to fully address these issues. It's not possible to determine whether the proposed development is feasible, nor is it possible to accurately assess the full extent of adverse impacts to the wetlands based on the materials provided. Nonetheless, given the material provided, it is our opinion that the proposed development will have an adverse impact on the wetland and upland areas and will pose a risk to the general safety of the public. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
And I do have a couple of questions for Mr. Sandolo, but I'm happy to yield to the commissioners first because he may address them.
Yes, George Perkins for the record. When you talk about on page 3, when you talk about 15 spaces, is that 15 spaces equal 30 cars or 15 cars?
15 cars. So some of those are 10.
Yeah. What? I'll look at this. This is Dan. Did I hear you say that the swell, when they cut it, will impede, they're gonna cut about 3 or 4 feet of the wetlands out with the swell? Is that what I heard from you?
No, let me clarify.
Yeah.
So the newly proposed swale at the top of the rock cut that's meant to divert runoff around
Right.
development. It's the extent of grading for that swale comes within about 3 to 5 feet of flagged wetlands on the northeast of the site. So what I'm saying, and requires some additional tree removals in that area as well.
Okay.
What I'm saying is the construction of that swale, when you go and physically do the earthwork for that swale and remove those trees, you're in such close proximity to the wetlands there. I don't really see how you don't impact the wetland putting
Oh.
that in.
So it's not cutting into the wetlands as far as you know. Oh.
There's no proposed grading within the wetland
Yeah,
proper. itself.
yeah. Or the setback. All right,
Can I do a follow-up question on that?
sure.
Kathleen Helm, for the record, there's been some testimony regarding the necessity of that swale. Have you opined on whether or not that swale is necessary?
So yeah, so there is an upstream watershed that drains directly onto this project, as we've seen the maps for in previous meetings. I would say that some measure to divert flow, upstream flow and clean runoff and groundwater, divert that flow around the development is warranted. There could be a number of ways to do it. I think a swale is something that makes a lot of sense. But it does increase the or well, lessen the proximity of disturbance to the wetland.
Thank you.
This is Dan again. Just for my edification. SA Minor, are you an engineering company?
Yes, SE Minor is surveying and engineering company.
Survey and engineering, okay, okay.
And this is George Perkins for the record. On dot number 3 on page 1, The proposed development will increase runoff volumes in a one-year storm by nearly 3,000 cubic feet. Is there a study to, do you have a study or what references can you point to verify this?
So that's out of the proposed stormwater management report prepared by the applicant's engineer.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Any questions? Thank you. Oh, you got two.
I do have just a couple of quick questions for Mr. Sandolo. Just going back to the swale for a moment in terms of the adverse impact to the wetlands. You indicated that it was your opinion that there will be adverse impact to the wetlands in the construction of the swale. Did I understand that correctly?
Correct, yeah.
And what are the adverse impacts to the wetlands resulting from that construction, in your opinion?
Well, so the extent of the swale and the extent of the grading, the proposed condition is one thing, but the extent of disturbance to construct it is another thing. I think at least it's unclear, if there will be, given the proximity, there's a high risk of encroachment beyond the proposed limit of disturbance, or at least the final limit of disturbance, the final limit of grading. So, when you have to construct that, you have machinery and you're dropping trees and things like that. So you're within 3 to 5 feet of the wetland itself in some places. So you're in very close proximity.
You also discussed the issues about the peak flow rates, and you and your firm have testified previously as to the impacts to the wetlands associated with the peak flow rates. Does it remain SE Minor's opinion that that will have an adverse impact on the wetlands?
Yes.
And again, I think SE Minor testified about that extensively. Has anything changed in terms of SE Minor's views about the impacts of the wetlands that you testified to previously?
No.
You also discussed the retaining wall issue and the question about the integrity of the wall. Again, SE Minor testified previously about the likelihood of impacts to the wetlands associated with the construction of the retaining wall as it's been planned by the applicant here. Has there been any changes in your opinion as to the adverse impact to the wetlands associated with the construction of that retaining wall?
No, as I stated previously, I think what's trying to be accomplished there is infiltrating runoff and having a structurally sound retaining wall. And I had stated previously, I don't really see how you achieve both. And so at this point, they've sort of addressed the infiltration of runoff, but now I have more questions about the structural integrity of the wall, given the new detail. So no, I don't feel that they've addressed that.
And just to be clear, it is your opinion and SE Minor's opinion that that will have an adverse impact to the wetlands.
Yes.
And again, not to repeat anything that was testified previously, but you and your colleague, Mr. Liebman, gave extensive testimony in prior hearings about the impacts to the wetlands. Is there any change into your opinions on those issues?
No, we have all the same concerns, really.
Thank you. Thank you.
Could I just clarify one item, Kathleen Holland, for the record? There have been additional submittals. And I'm just wondering, like your report isn't totally clear to me at what point you finish this review versus what may have come in. So I would just make sure that everything that has been, because there's been a flurry of information being submitted over the last 48 to 24 hours. So I myself haven't had a chance to review it all, but I know there's some additional GZA reports, I believe.
I will say that we have at least looked at everything. Have we had as much time with it as we would have liked? I won't speak for Mr. Sindel, I'll speak for myself. To that extent, no. Would obviously like more time with it. As you indicated, we received some of these items over the weekend, but I do believe Mr. Sandel, I'll let him answer as to what he put his eyes on.
I did. I was able to look at everything and review some pieces in more depth than others, but I did see everything that came in over the weekend and today.
Okay, great. Back to the swale again, Kathleen Holland, for the record. The entire swale is not within a regulated area. So there's a portion of the swale that perhaps you're can you tell me, are you more concerned about from a wetland impact point of view?
Right, sorry, yeah, I was speaking specifically about the portion of the swale along the northeast corner of that rock cut, where, where it's closest to the wetland. Where it starts to take a turn south and divert flow to the point of concern.
In my mind, that swale does not seem as crucial for diversion of water because of the way it's running down the slope there. So if potentially that swale was eliminated, would that be, in your opinion, something that could be accommodated in order to lessen the impact to the wetlands along that location?
Well, without the swale, you'll have runoff from upslope, sort of dumping over that rock cut. So you want to divert that flow in some way. Like I said, I think that the swale is sort of the best way to accomplish something like that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So what you're really saying, they have to be more careful. Is that what you're saying?
There's another case where, you're.
If we need a swale and we need it probably there, what alternative? Yeah.
You could have it without, you could do a swale, or you can do like drainage infrastructure, or there's different ways to do it. But I would agree that, because concerns were raised in the past that, you have this water coming from upslope pouring over the wall, so ideally you do want to deal with that in some way.
Do you have anything? Angela?
I was just going to follow up on that. Earlier presenters talked about the possibility of a temporary berm rather than a swale. Would that be a better solution in your view?
It's another solution.
Mhm.
I guess the concern I would have with a berm other than a swale is you have a higher risk of failure, I guess, where the berm could fail or blow out in certain places, whereas a swale is a more permanent feature. But it takes up, has a larger footprint than a berm would, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess we have nothing more.
Okay, if I can make some remarks here.
Yeah.
See the UGC report. Okay. So we don't have any other presenters other than myself, just to make a few remarks. So I was going to try to be concise tonight, given the past issue or past discussion that we've presented to this commission. In a lot of respects, our position remains unchanged. Yes, the applicant has come forth with nice volume of documents over the last week, about 500 plus pages, went through a couple reams of paper in my office, putting it together and going through it. And yes, they addressed a number of concerns, but what's notable is what's still lacking from the applicant. And there's really two avenues, decisions that this commission has to make, and I think they're well aware of it. One is, did the applicant meet its burden of proving its compliance with the statutory requirements for its application here? And we submit the answer is no. Two, have we sustained our burden of showing adverse impacts to the wetlands? Mr. Sandolo has covered that issue today. Mr. Sandolo and Mr. Liebman covered that extensively back in the January meeting as to the adverse impact to the wetlands. What remains unaddressed are some of the key issues that were testified to by SE Minor the first time around. Number one was the structural integrity of that wall. And I'm going to get back to this in a moment, but again, we've got this binder here, 500 plus pages of documents and reports submitted by the applicants. Over the past 4 months, they've received numerous comments from the town engineer, from the town's peer reviewers, as well as from us, the interveners. They've had ample time to address those concerns, and a lot of concerns were not addressed. And I'm going to use the retaining wall that Mr. Sandolo discussed as an example. Despite all this paperwork that's been submitted, this is actually part of it as well. Again, this is the GZA report that came in over the weekend. One thing that they didn't address in that GZA report is the structural design of the wall. The very thing that we, the interveners, raised as a major concern of an adverse impact to the wetlands. That's going to be performed by others. When that's going to be done, I guess your answer is as good as mine. Maybe we'll find out tonight when that work is going to actually be done so we can evaluate it. Because again, you heard from SE Minor both today and at the prior hearing that that design is not structurally sound in their estimation. And we've seen nothing to date to show otherwise. And that is one of the direct impacts to the wetlands that SE Minor has testified to and that the interveners have presented to this commission. We think that's significant because despite having 4 months now of comments, beginning in October, I think was the town engineer's first letters. Mr. Klein talked about this in his testimony tonight as well, of his disappointment in the process, because there is a process here for this commission. And there is, typically some back and forth. There's no back and forth here. There's just forth. And that inadequacy to respond to numerous concerns, both by the town engineer, by the town's consultants, as well as by the interveners, I think is very telling as to what's missing here and what can't be achieved. And I think that's part of the issue here, is we have these issues that we have presented, and we have no answers to many of these issues. We talked about this before. I've talked about it in my submissions of the lack of completeness. And the question for this Wetlands Commission, and one of the questions that it's tasked to answer in connection with this application, is do you have the information you need to evaluate the full impact to the wetlands by this proposed development? It is huge. It is complex. There's obviously been extensive work by the applicant to give you as much information as they can. Or did they? It's part of the question. Again, the gaps in what's not there, what they've not addressed from the town consultants, what they've not addressed from us, I think again is very telling as to the strength and merits of their application and whether there will be adverse impact to the wetlands. And we submit that the answer is in what's not been provided. They can't give that information without showing the adverse impacts to the wetlands as we presented to this commission. I think it's that plain and simple. I talked about this at I believe the last hearing, about the credibility of the witnesses as you hear them. That is a determination that this commission is allowed to make of which set of experts, which witnesses are you going to believe, who are you going to give credible testimony, who are you going to give credibility to in their testimony. I think you've heard from SE Minor. I think they are incredibly credible into what they've presented. A lot of the comments that SE Minor first raised were echoed by many of the town consultants in many respects. The applicant in this case, and I'm not going to go through the history of the applicant's time with the commission and what they've said in the past. That was a discussion for another day about what was said was going to happen in this development, what wasn't said. But I will say this about that topic. That goes on to the credibility of the applicant and what their intentions were. You can look at some of the reports that were submitted over the past week, some of the older reports, and they show that a multifamily development was being explored back in 2000, I believe it was 18, despite what they've said in the past before this commission. So when we're talking about credibility here of the applicant versus the town's consultants and the interveners, I think the credibility is clear where it should lie and where it should not lie. And that's with the interveners in this case, as well as the town consultants. The application, it's lacking. There's no other way to put it. This is a complex project. Attorney Smith, over the summer before this commission, I think said it very well. You are all the guardians of the wetlands. That is the task of this commission, is to protect the wetlands, to make sure that they're adequately protected. And like it or not, this application, this proposal by the applicant, it's insufficient. It's insufficient in design. Its scope is too broad, and it's that simple. And there's also a feasible and prudent alternative here. They presented it to this commission in the past. It's a it's a 2-lot development. Mr. Klein spoke about that earlier. He agreed with that. That is a reasonable and prudent alternative to this design. They want to build something there, they can come to this commission, they can seek that application without issue, provided they meet their standards and satisfy those standards. But this design, it's the old adage of a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't fit the development. It's not proper for the development. The materials that they've submitted, while extensive, they're still lacking. They lack support, they lack completion for this commission to make a full determination as to the safeguarding of the wetlands in this instance. They cannot meet their burden here today. I'm going to just touch upon, one last area about that completeness. We've talked about the Army Corps of Engineers. Again, why is that relevant? It's certainly a different jurisdiction that they cover, but again, to the extent the Army Corps of Engineers has additional work that they are going to be required to perform, we don't know the answer to that yet. It is an unknown, and by the submission of the Army Corps of Engineers, I don't think we're going to have an answer to that for quite some time. If you see the latest correspondence that was included with our submission today, I believe that is it's tab 3, but don't quote me on that. But the Army Corps of Engineers, that remains an outstanding issue. Other things that weren't addressed, we talked extensively about the rock crushing and the impact that will have on the wetlands. There's been some discussion about that from the applicant in their materials, but again, a lot of the issues raised by the interveners and us at the last hearing have gone unaddressed as to the silica dust impact on the wetlands. I believe the report from the applicant talked about the fact that this rock does have silica, and that is going to be an impact to the wetlands, as we testified at the last hearing. These issues remain, again, unaddressed. The guardrail, again, that's another issue that the applicant has decided to leave for another day. Yes, where they're proposing to put the guardrail is in the prior approved area. But what does that look like? We don't know right now because those plans haven't been provided. The applicant indicated that that's something that they'll provide at another day. But depending on how that construction is made, they may have to come back to this commission because it may impact the wetlands and in that regulated area, depending on what that construction looks like. But again, it's something we don't know right now because they haven't provided that information. In closing, these failures, both the impact, the negative and adverse impact to the wetlands, warrant the denial of this application. The applicant's failure to provide complete information to this commission warrants the denial of this application. They very simply cannot satisfy their own burden of proving compliance with the statutory requirements for a wetlands permit. I do thank the commissions for their efforts in this regard. To the extent we are provided yet more new information, we do want to have the opportunity to respond to that. But do we understand that time is short? So I thank you all for your time and efforts.
Thank you.
George Perkins again. Thank you very much for this report. I think it was concise and to the point and easily understandable.
I actually have a question relating to the comment about the Army Corps of Engineers. My understanding is that the Army Corps of Engineers has a completely separate jurisdiction from the town of New Canaan and the Inland Wetland Commission of New Canaan, that the processes run in parallel and, each come up with their own conclusions independently. So help me understand why this is an impediment to this application. I mean, obviously, if the Army Corps of Engineers comes back and requires particular work and that involves, that impacts the wetlands, this applicant would have to come back just like anybody else.
That's correct. I don't dispute that that's correct in that regard.
So why is it such a big issue, the Army Corps of Engineers?
Well, to me, it is a necessary permit and approval that the applicant needs to obtain in order to proceed in this regard. Right now, they're still operating under a cease and desist, and until that issue is resolved, they cannot move and operate on that front.
I'm still having a hard time seeing why it's an impediment to this application.
I look at it as a prerequisite that needs to be satisfied as part of their application. I'm sure their council will disagree with that, but that is my view on the matter.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I'm good.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep, yep. Is this commission? Well, right now, the last thing, is there anybody on the phone?
Public, I think you might want to do any other comments from the public and then, yeah, great.
Yeah,
So I can do a quick check here.
is there anyone from the public that wants to make some comments?
Just want to announce, is there anyone on Zoom? You Just want to
Is there anyone on Zoom
just raise their hand and then
that would like to make a comment?
they can unmute themselves.
Just raise your hand and unmute yourself.
I am not seeing anyone on Zoom.
No one on Zoom? Again, if there's anyone on Zoom that would like to make a comment, raise your hands and unmute yourself. Anyone in the audience here that would like to make a comment? Raise your hand.
Okay, no.
No, I guess not. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right.
Participants.
Now the final.
I'd like to ask a question.
Oh, hold on.
All right, yes.
This
Hold on.
is John, sorry. All right, this is John Festo, and I was wondering about the silicate dust. And since we're very close to the property's edge, I was wondering how it might affect us and my 90-year-old mother. And
I think you're going, that's not a wetlands issue. We're gonna have to take it up with planning and zoning.
He can.
okay,
And they're
Thank you.
meeting tomorrow night, so I think they have a public hearing, so. And I think they're gonna be in this room, aren't they? At town hall, so if you can zoom in.
yes, sir, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on Zoom? Speak up. Okay, no one else. So the fifth presentation will be a rebuttal from
The owner applicant.
applicant, yeah.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Wetlands Director Holland. For the record, my name is Chris Smith. I am a land use attorney with the law firm of Walter and Pearson, and I do appear before you this evening on behalf of the owner applicant, 72 Hill Street 72 LLC. I do have some quick questions or just a few questions for Mr. Klein, just to clarify a few items, at least for me.
Okay.
If Mr. Klein has a
Mr.
moment.
Klein, can you come up?
I don't know if you want,
No, he can sit there if that's all right. Or sit
Well, we
next
got
to you,
hearing.
whichever.
We're going to hear.
Just don't pull the
There you go.
I won't pick you or anything.
As long as I don't kick. Mr. Chairman, if your procedure is to do this straightforward, that's fine, however you typically handle this.
Sit down. Sit down.
These will be pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Mr. Klein and I have, just for the record, that we know each other and worked with each other over time and opposite sides.
Correct.
I don't consider this an opposite side. I consider this as you're doing your job as the third party consultant for the commission. And just a few questions. I don't think you were here for Mr. Canis's testimony at the outset where he talked about as you're aware, there will be a small increase in volume relative to the stormwater runoff.
Correct.
And it was Mr. Candace's opinion that it is indeed a small increase in volume and there won't be any negative impact to downstream wetlands. I don't know if you heard that.
I didn't hear it tonight, but I believe it was in his report.
It was, I think he made reference to it being de minimis, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And in your opinion, will the small increase in the runoff, will that have an adverse effect on a wetland or watercourse?
The calculated changes, in my opinion, are probably within the error implicit in the method. So,
Go ahead, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Mr. Klein.
so I guess I would consider that to be a negligible change.
So will that negligible change have an adverse impact, excuse me, you know, that's the standard, you know,
Yeah.
that, to a wetland or a watercourse?
If the change is within the amount calculated, I do not believe that would have an adverse effect.
And I think with regard to the stormwater system and soil and erosion and the planting plan that, well, certainly with the stormwater management, I think you may have said that you have a high degree of confidence that it will function if it's constructed and maintained as designed.
I think what I said is that conceptually, it's a sound plan and that it requires a long-term commitment to proper maintenance and operation. And if that were to occur, then I believe it will function as intended.
And I know that you said this, that you said that if it's constructed and maintained, that it will not result in a significant impact.
That's correct.
So my question to you, because I think we've had this discussion before, in your opinion, Mr. Klein, if it's constructed and maintained properly, then in your opinion, will it result in an adverse impact or not result in an adverse impact to a wetland or watercourse if it's constructed and maintained as designed?
There are some outstanding issues. If those issues were resolved and if it was constructed and maintained as it is finally designed, then I do not believe it would have a significant adverse effect.
And what are those outstanding issues that would have to be
I
addressed?
believe I elucidated them in my report.
In one of, well, there were a number of minor comments as you made reference, and then you made reference to a bond. Couple of quick questions with the bonding. Isn't it true that you've been involved in preparing ENS control bonding proposals relative to representing applicants?
Yes,
And you've also have experience in preparing proposed planting and invasive plans, bonding requirements for such.
yes,
And you also that you've had experience in preparing bonding quotes for stormwater management, presumably with an engineer, but you've done that on behalf of applicants.
Not sure about the last one.
Stormwater management, long-term
Yeah.
controls.
I have recommended that plans be prepared to accomplish that. I have reviewed plans. I'm not sure I authored or prepared cost estimates for them.
For stormwater management.
Right, for stormwater management.
And have you had any experience in preparing stormwater management agreement plans or, bonding requirements where it's not necessarily the numerical financial amount, but for long-term maintenance?
I have reviewed, yes, I have assisted in preparation or review of those plans.
Thank you. Isn't it true that sometimes, I think you made reference to, towns do it differently. Sometimes the bonding can occur with planning and zoning, can occur with wetlands. We know under the state statute, wetlands in any town, the town can require ENS control, bonding for ENS controls. That's specifically provided for. And it also can occur at the time that the building permit is secured. Isn't that true? I think you might have said that, but I'm not sure.
I said that is sometimes the procedure, I'm not sure that those provisions can be appropriately or properly deferred until that time, but sometimes it happens that way, yes.
And the cost for any, like, maintaining a stormwater management system could change between year 2023 and 2025 if the open permit is secured at that time. Reasonable, I mean, it could.
Well, sure, but it would also be, you would want to have a contingency, and a proper plan would have an inflation rider for inflating those costs over time. So there might be some minor adjustments that might be necessary, but wouldn't be significant.
And again, you've reviewed agreements as per such.
Yes,
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have. And thank you, Mr. Klein. I
Sure.
appreciate it
good to see you.
Thank you.
as well.
Hopefully we'll all get home alive
Safely,
tonight.
yeah, since we're going about the same distance.
I'm told it has started snowing.
It's very small,
Okay,
right? No, I don't know.
I don't know. That's
Uh,
snowing.
So, Mr. Chairman, what we propose to do is to go through the material that we had submitted that you did hear from your third-party consultants that they received and they responded to. We did hear from the interveners that they had reviewed it as well, and presumably that was the response that we heard this evening relative to that. But what we'd like to do is to go through those responses for the commission and field any of your questions. And then I do have a short Attorney Shapiro's conclusion from some certain points that I would like to make.
How long do you think it might take you?
I'm hoping that we can finish by that 10 o'clock curfew, so.
Mr. Chairman, in view of the hour and the weather, I would propose that this be carried over until Wednesday.
You think you can get it done in an hour?
Team?
I mean, George, I thought we were gonna try to get to an hour, to 10 o'clock. And then maybe, change our minds or leave after that.
Well, I anticipated a 9 o'clock ending. And again, I reiterate my proposal.
Does anyone else want to stop now? And can everyone go to 10 o'clock? Let me ask you that besides George. Any?
I'm prepared to go on longer because my concern at this point is we're running out of time. This is approaching the 12th hour. Issues keep arising. There is material shared and that raises more questions, which then have to be answered. And then, needs to be another round. I just think we're running out of time.
You're going to meet Wednesday anyway, and I think to
Well,
get,
we won't meet on
Right.
Wednesday.
We
We would not.
I'm not your legal counsel, but Mr. Perkins, if he were to leave, unless you don't have a quorum, could certainly just.
Oh, I
watch
Want
the-
George to stay.
I will stay. That's not the problem. I just think that since we were meeting on Wednesday night, and the hour is at 9 and people seem to be packing up, I think there might be more attention paid and you might have a better meeting on Wednesday.
Is that all right too?
okay, sorry, we're having.
So
a
what
couple-
we'll do, hopefully, 10 o'clock or so. I don't think there'll be any other presentations after you, and then we'll just adjourn the meeting. And then we won't have a Monday or a Wednesday night special meeting.
That was my understanding with everyone, is that if we could get through tonight, that would be the case.
Yeah.
And we'll make every effort to get done by 10.
Anyone else on the commission? Anyone want to comment on that? All right, so let's do that. Let's go to 10.
Okay, so.
Thereabouts, yeah.
So Derek, we'll first hear from Derek Donay, our civil engineer. And he will address, there was an exhibit I referred to, it was a team effort to pull this together and to try to do an exhibit. Well, we did an exhibit A with a list of all the different items that were submitted, and we tried to put them in headings, either as responsive to the third-party consultant or to the intervener, minor, or different topics and headings. So we're gonna try to follow that, but Mr. Donay will go first, and then we'll hear from Mr. Tenney.
Good evening. My name is Derek Donay, licensed professional engineer from DeAndrea Surveying and Engineering, PC. Our firm provided the civil site engineering design for the development. The package was recently submitted to the town that included revised plans, reports, and point-by-point response letters to the different review comments made by the town engineer, the town's two peer consultants, and the interveners engineer. I will now review how we responded to those comments. Many of the comments overlapped with each other of the different reviewers. So I'll group those together by subject so as not to repeat myself. So I'm not going to go through each reviewer's comments one by one. Instead, I'll just go through the different subjects that happened that occurred in all of them. So one of the first ones in regards to the storm drainage model, there was questions that occurred for that. Right now we have the first slide up, which was the flow paths, and what the intervener engineer had responded to or questioned about the hydraulically furthest point. We have revised the model and the flow path correctly in the model for that. And I believe everyone is in agreement with them now. We did that for both existing and proposed conditions. So the next slide shows proposed conditions, the flow paths. And as you will see, as you get on the northern side there, that's where the offsite, if you remember, there was a small triangular shape of offsite watershed that comes onto our property towards the development. And that's where the northern, we put a swale in for along the northern portion of the rock cut. And so as the water comes down, you can follow the blue arrows, but it comes down and follows the swale and goes around the development at this point. So that's how we're keeping the offsite watershed going into the development. There's also a swale that we had proposed on the eastern side, but that does not collect much water at all. It was more of a, do we need something at the top? Because a lot of people have been asking about it or not. There's usually at the top of your rock cut, you have maybe a 5-foot platform, something like that, you know, a levelish area. And then you regrade the overburden at the top there. And after this design was prepared, as Bill Kenny had mentioned in his recommendations, due to the fact that there's not much water coming from an uphill area into that swale on the eastern side. His recommendation, which was to reduce impacts towards that intermittent watercourse wetlands, which is our nearest point is of disturbance was more 10 feet than the 3 feet or so previously mentioned. But anyways, we can reduce that by eliminating that swale. And he had also proposed, instead of doing our typical layback of the overburden, we can tighten that up and maybe that becomes a riprap. It's only like 3 feet high, basically 4 feet of overburden. So you have a 4-foot high riprap slope instead. In that way, you can tighten it up and you don't have to lay it back so much to keep that away from the intermittent water course. And I know that's been a big concern tonight, and we agree to that as far as removing that swale on the eastern side, tightening that up to move further away from the intermittent water course. Next slide. So the next slide here is the overall, this shows the watershed from all of the uphill properties that come down into the wetlands on our site. In the southwest corner of the site is our wetlands. So as you see, you have 17.7 acres of offsite area that comes down and then joins with the flows from our property and go to the wetlands area. Go to the next slide, please. So proposed conditions, you will see the proposed development there. Oh, no, yeah, go back. There you go. Can you zoom in a little bit in that area? Under proposed conditions, you'll see the triangular area just north of our property. Now, this has been an area of concern with the public, the interveners, and it's been questioned here by the commission. So I just want to review this with you. The way it works, that part of our property is the highest rock ledge or rock point up there. And that's the high point. And on each side, it's going down. We have our intermittent water course, which is to the west, or excuse me, to the east of that. And then on the western side of our property, there's another like water course that's collecting a lot of watershed area and goes to the wetlands area. So what happens is the uphill areas drain towards those areas. And one of the neighbors, Mr. Durkin, he had mentioned how he witnesses coming down the shared driveway. He has lots of water that comes and then it enters the northeast portion of our property there. And so he's talking about how there's a lot of water coming onto the property. And I'm not disputing that there's water coming onto the property. What I'm saying is there's the intermittent water course between where that enters the property and our development. It doesn't go into the intermittent water course or splash back uphill out of that towards the development. It follows it down and around through the new culvert and into the wetland. So that's how there's not as much of an area uphill of the development area of the property that's we have to divert with the diversion swale. So it's a relatively small amount of water that is being collected by the diversion swale. Please go to the next slide. Okay, so then right now this is just showing the proposed development with the different drainage systems, and there were comments that came up. Some of these have already been talked about, and so we'll just go through it. There was a hydrogeologic impact assessment report, which was prepared by Weston and Sampson, and that had to do with the two different concerns. There was a lot of talk about potential for acid rock drainage, which is, and I'll try to remember what this was because that's not my forte, but it had to do with the iron sulfate. If they're in the rock, and then you have stormwater that goes over this, and then this can produce an acid rock drainage impact, which you don't want. They did their study of the area. And they came to an conclusion that basically that, hold on, where is it? The potential for acid rock drainage and any associated impact to groundwater and surface water quality is extremely low due to the rocks that are currently in that area. However, as a precaution, they advised, and we added this note onto our phasing plan, that visual inspections of the rock as it's being removed should be done to see if there are high levels of iron sulfate. If you do find those rocks, then those rocks, instead of being crushed and processed and maybe used on site, they get hauled off site as the rocks and disposed of in a certain area. And that gets, I think it's worked out with the Connecticut DEP if you find that type of material. So, but right now, so that's it. So it's extremely low probability that is there, but we have measures taken that we've written down to account for it if it is. The other part of their report was the estimate of groundwater discharge from the ledge cut. That was a big concern, knowing that there's groundwater in the area and the big rock cut and how much water is going to be pouring out of this. So they run their tests based on the soils, the groundwater, the type of rock, and they computed the flow was de minimis, but was added. However, we added it to the drainage model. So they come up with a flow of what they have. They have a low and a high end of it. We use the high end of it to be conservative in our model. And it ended up, it was like 0.009 CFS or something like that. So that's added into the drainage model under proposed condition as a constant flow of water coming from our site towards the wetlands area. We did all the additional test pits that the different consultants had requested as per the Connecticut DEP Stormwater Quality Manual standards. Those involve both visual observation of the soils up to 3 feet below our proposed retention systems, as well as infiltration testing about a foot below the infiltration systems. The storm, okay, and then this came up during, I believe it was Maria Coplit's, one of her comments. So the proposed stormwater retention systems, those are water quality volume systems. They're not meant to retain 100-year storm event. Those are not for that matter. They're for treating. Some of them are larger than needed for water quality volume because we're getting additional storage in them. But so those systems are supposed to fill up or, as the larger storms happen. Water goes into them first. There's a diversion structure. And so water first goes into that. It gets directed to those retention systems. There's constant infiltration going out of them, but during the very peak events, during a very large storm event, those systems would, the water would be coming in faster than it can exfiltrate out. Eventually they would fill up, and then it's a high overflow to further downstream detention system. So that was not a concern about the systems filling up. That was the intent, is they're only supposed to handle smaller amounts of water, not the full large 25-year event, storm events. So that's acceptable in our mind. And I don't know if Maria quite understood that or not, but that's our response to her comment. Let's see, what else? Let's see. Oh yeah, so we did the infiltration testing that we did. We then use that and put it into our drainage model. As Mr. Candace had mentioned, we omitted certain outliers, and those were the ones that were on the faster draining aspect of it. So if you have faster draining soils, more water goes in, more water goes into the ground faster. It'd be our benefit to use those. But as an engineer, I'd prefer to be more conservative in my design. So we omitted those outliers and we used the average and the lower end ones as a more conservative design model as far as our infiltration. And then you also take into account, as recommended by the Connecticut DEP, instead of using, say you had, I'm just making up a number, say you had 5 inches per hour as your infiltration rate in the field, you would use half of that and you use 2.5 inches per hour. That way, it's another conservative way of these estimates. But anyways, all that was included into the drainage model for each of the retention systems that were proposed. The green roof area, can you go to the next slide? So the green roof area, and you might be able to see it, it's in the top left, is our building. So this was a question about the green roof area. And I think now that I've heard Mr. Klein talk some more, I can speak more about this to maybe so he understands this. The green roofs, which consist of a minimum, it's basically vegetation on top of a minimum of 4 inches of soil for growing. And that is used, water goes through it, it's infiltrated, that helps filter any of the rainwater, and it slows down how fast the water leaves the site for those areas. That's the purpose of those. It's kind of like a rain garden on the roof, just like a thin rain garden on the roof. So anyway, so we used our numbers, were modified in our model to match the numbers in his on his roofing plan that he designed. So now everything matches there. Previously, we had said about 40% of the roof. It's closer to 44% of the roof.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Well, what's the purpose of a rain roof? I mean, is it beautification? Is it
Multiple things. Yes, beautification. I mean, if you're hanging out on the roof, as it seems like there's a rooftop amenity, instead of seeing just a plain roof, you might see whether it's low grasses or whatever the vegetation is they put in it, that part. But the main parts are stormwater, one. So instead of say you have just a black tar roof or something like that, solid liner roof, and it gets hot in the summertime. And now you have rainwater coming down, it hits that, the water's hot, it might pick up whatever pollutants were in there, and it quickly goes into your pipe system and then out. It might get treated further downstream, but this is a treatment measure at the source. So instead, now you have this vegetated area, it doesn't get as hot, the water goes through it, and it's not picking up any pollutants that you would normally find on a roof. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason is reducing, like, what is that, the heat island effect you might have. Like if all the buildings in downtown had green roofs, it's not as hot as if they're all, regular solid roofs. So those are some of the environmental and stormwater reasons why we would do a green roof.
But does the roof have to be stronger to
Correct.
hold
So
on
that
that?
was the next thing I wanted to go over. So what Mr. Klein, just to go with him, what that is right now, the architectural plans, they're kind of conceptualized. They show number of rooms, what the room layouts are and stuff like that, but they haven't been fully designed yet as far as structural detailing. That comes at the next level prior to building permit, where you get into that. You know, you just start getting floor plans and layout concepts and stuff at this time for zoning purposes. You then have to go through, and that's when the structural engineer has to review everything, and they have to do loads. Now, as I said, you can get the green roofs are a minimum of 4 inches of soil. Some go deeper depending on how much treatment or the type of plants you want to do. The structural engineer then has to account for the depth of soil in their weight. So that's why some people don't want to do a green roof, because they say, I don't want to put the extra money into my structure. Some people think they're great because they're good for the environment and they don't mind putting the extra money into it. And sometimes you just have to do it as an approval measure, as a stormwater quality measure, something like that. And people say, okay, it's a sacrifice, but I will put the money into the structure because that's the only way I can do it to get approved. And as far as that goes, then you have overflow drains that tie, and the mechanical engineer gets involved on how those get piped through the building. So I think that might be what he's asking at some point, and that's when the building gets fully designed in CD drawings, the construction design drawings, when you have the structural engineer, the MEP, as far as the loads of the green roof and how the water exits the building. Let's see, the western retaining wall, that's been a big subject that everyone's been talking about. Go to the next slide. Okay. If you zoom into maybe AA. So we have the 3 sections that we had on our design plans, and these show the cross section. It shows the retaining wall in comparison with the proposed stormwater retention systems as they're in the ground. If you can see that section, there's a dashed green line, and that's kind of the existing grade as it goes through the site. So the stormwater retention systems in this section right here, it's under the existing ground. It's not in a fill area. I think section BB is in a fill area. And anyways, so the question comes up with, okay, if you're putting all the stormwater behind the retaining wall, how does it impact the retaining wall? So GZA was asked to prepare a report. They reviewed it, and their review was not on the structural integrity itself of the wall, the design of the wall, but how the impacts, because that was the main concern, how are the impacts of the stormwater system impacting the wall? Because normally you have a wall and no one really cares so much about the structural design at this level of it. You get it usually prior to building permit, or it has to be designed. There's building code rules that it have to be designed by a structural engineer. But because you have a retention system that's infiltrating stormwater behind it, it's a concern. It's rightfully so. Everyone should be asking these questions. So the way we design this right now, and as everyone's mentioned, so the upper portion of the wall that's out of the ground would be a regular mortared wall. And that mortar might go a little bit below ground too, just to connect with some of those stones. The other stones and a dry laid stack wall is, it's done. It's not that it's totally uncommon. You can do retaining walls that don't have mortar. You do have to be careful on how you set the stones, and you need proper structural engineer guidance. You need guidance in the field. And these are recommendations by GZA. In their report, they concluded that the retaining walls are suitable for retaining the proposed fill with the stormwater infiltration systems, provided that the walls are constructed consistent with the information included in their report. So what their analysis was, they wanted to know how the water goes through the soil and then moves laterally towards the wall. Now we've shown already the impermeable liners on the western side of the retention systems so it doesn't just bleed right out of the systems towards the wall. Instead, it has to go down further and then go towards the wall. We want to get and those liners are all been designed on the plans to go deeper than the grade on the low side of the wall. We want that water to go underneath the wall and not through the wall. So these are being designed without a typical, say, wall drainage system at the base that's going to be picking up this water and shooting it into the wetlands. So instead, to allow this water to get, retaining wall is usually like 3.5 feet, the base of it below grade, for frost protection and stability. And so this is more, the water then it goes underground, and in the areas where the groundwater or it hits the wall that's below grade, it can filter through the stones in the wall there. Now, what they did in their analysis, they wanted to see, they're checking on what do they call it? The global stability evaluation. So they're checking on the soils. They want to know, is this water going to come out of these systems so fast that it's going to loosen the soil and kind of make it more spongy, where you would have that impact like a landslide where it would just come crashing down. And that was their analysis. And they computed that, no, that's not going to happen with these soils that are out here. And they computed it with the systems filled with water, with the exfiltration rate. They went out there, they dug test pits around the retaining wall, both uphill and downhill of the wall. And they did, so that's all in their report there. That was their conclusion. They wanted to say, no, these systems will not have an adverse impact on the retaining wall stability. Now, the retaining wall itself still has to be finalized. The design has to be confirmed with a structural engineer, but that's fine. That's just a regular load impact study. But the crux of this was about the retention systems behind it, and they will not, according to their report, have an adverse impacts on the structural stability of the retaining walls. Let's see what else. Go to the next slide. That's the porous. Okay, so this came up a lot with the driveway, and there was a lot of things, with the history of the driveway. Are these walls structurally sound? Will they be able to? Everyone felt okay, it's fine for like cars and stuff, but what about construction trafficking, fire trucks, concrete trucks? What's going to happen? And the traffic going in and out. So GZA was hired to perform a study on these walls, and they did it. They saw the history, they know the construction of it, all the different layers that went in, the excavation of the existing, like these walls in the driveway weren't built on a spongy wetland soil. And that was previously, we had come back to remove the soil beneath it so you have a more stable base. And anyway, so then you came in and they installed the structural fill beneath it. Now that created a nice stable base. That structural fill is not meant for infiltration. These are wetlands. There, as you see, there's water right up to the bottom of the wall. That water goes right underneath the wall too, and underneath the driveway. It's not meant for infiltration in a wetlands. You can't infiltrate in a wetlands. The purpose of the layers that are now above that structural fill, which were built in accordance with the approved plans for the driveway, it's a system of crushed stones, different layers, larger ones, smaller ones, and then you have a bank run gravel, and then that's where they are at this stage. They're up to that point, just a bank run gravel. In the bottom layer of the first layer of crushed stone is a underdrain system. So after the water comes through the porous pavement, through the filtering bank run gravel, through the stone, it then hits the underdrain and gets piped out to the wetlands. So it's not meant for stormwater retention. It's really just meant for filtering the stormwater from the driveway area. It's a good stormwater measurement to have porous pavement. Anyway, so as we all know previously, this came up by the interveners in the past, that it was not built in accordance with the plans. It was decided at a previous wetlands hearing that it was fine. There was no evidence that it wasn't built in accordance to the plans. The culvert, there's a large culvert, it's about 10 feet wide at the bottom, was designed for traffic loading and everything. So this system right now is okay for trafficking. Now GZA, what they did a report to review now the retaining walls on each side of it. Now the approved plans showed like almost like a snowman, like 3 rocks on top of each other, round rocks. That wasn't going to hold, and everybody knew that. So they weren't built 3 round rocks on top of each other. They were built with larger, flatter, more rectangular slabs of rock. And then behind that, they had poured concrete. They wanted to keep these as rigid, strong systems because they knew at some point there was going to be construction on this site, and you wanted to be able to handle construction loading. GZA did their analysis of the walls, and let's see, their conclusion was it was suitable to support the loads from fire trucks, concrete trucks on the driveway. And they talked about construction trafficking, within like a 5-year period was acceptable. So the walls themselves are okay, according to GZA, for construction trafficking. So another about the driveway. You got construction trafficking over this permeable pavement system. How is it going to infiltrate water? You got all this construction, is going to get compacted. Now, the lower levels are all the crushed stone, as I mentioned, different layers of it. And right now you have bank run gravel, which is basically like a sand. And then on top of that, there's currently 2 layers of a geosynthetic stabilization fabric and some more gravel on top of that. That way, when people are going in and out, right now, they're kind of separating from the lower systems. As construction is done on the development uphill, it'll all be done. Like that's the main goal. When I go over the phasings, I'll show you. You do all the uphill construction, then you work your way out. And the last thing you'll do would be the porous pavement system. You will come back, you will remove the crushed stone anti-tracking pad, you will remove the gravel on top, the geosynthetic separation layers. You'll probably have to scrape off part of the process aggregate, or excuse me, the bank run gravel layer. We've added notes just to confirm the infiltration rates of the system to make sure, is it still functioning, that it didn't get compacted, that the bank run gravel didn't get compacted too much. If it did, they don't work. They have to go back and replace that bank run gravel. But the crushed stone beneath, the under drains, all those systems will be fine. So after it's been verified, then you build the top layers, which is just another layer of crushed stone, and then your porous pavement gets on top of that. So then the drain. So I've talked about all these different things we've done as far as incorporating into the drainage model. The drainage model itself, so we added all the different storms, and the questions have come up in regards to the 2 areas. There's peak flow from the site, and then there's runoff volume. The difference is peak flow is the rate that the water leaves the site, and the volume is the amount of water that leaves the site. Typically, most other towns, typical practice is you control the peak flows. Connecticut DEP manual says that you control the peak flows, and the volume you want to treat the water quality volume. So groundwater recharge volume, water quality volume, you want to infiltrate all of those. We've done more than the water quality volume because some of our systems are larger. We have decreases in peak flows from the site for the 2 through the 100 year storm events. So those are all the larger storm events, the ones where there may be a concern. The 1-year event, which is still a big storm, but it happens more frequently. That's the one where we had a very de minimis increase in the peak flow. And we're talking 0.1 CFS from the site and 0.9 for the, it's like 9.9% for the overall watershed going to the wetlands. So it's a very small amount. And as Mr. Canis has mentioned, he doesn't feel like it's a big concern. But as he said, it didn't meet the town policy. They have a drainage policy that says stormwater, peak flow, or volume. In certain circumstances, you can't always meet some of this smaller, like a 1-year event. And then we're going to go out to runoff volume about as well. So the runoff volume was the next one. So that we had a slight increase. And it's pretty consistent throughout the different storms. It ranges from like 2,000 to 3,000 cubic feet, depending on the storm. But we had increases for the different storm events. Now, a lot of sites you have, or maybe you don't have good infiltrating soils. How do you reduce runoff then if you're going to build anything on the site? You can't. You can treat runoff, you can control runoff, but if you can't put it all into the ground, how do you reduce volume? So any of the sites in town that have they ledge under the ground or poorly draining soils, that policy is basically saying you can't do any impervious improvements on the site. You couldn't build a house or anything. You could treat the water, you can control the water, but if you can't put it into the ground, how do you reduce that volume? Which is why it's not used in any of the other towns. It's not used by the Connecticut DEP Stormwater Manual. That's not a typical standard practice. Let's see, and the increases in volume are not very large either. You have for the entire watershed, what I say, for the 1 year event, which is the most increase compared to existing conditions, you get it's like a 4.7% increase. The larger, like 25-year events, like 0.8% increase. Now with these, the question came up, what happens if you have an increase in volume to the wetlands? How does that adversely impact them? And as Bill Kenny will state, and what happens with the wetlands is you have water that goes into it. Now, a storm event, water comes in, wetlands fill up, and then they drain out. So it all depends. Like if they didn't have an outlet and it just kept ponding and ponding, and the water in the wetlands got higher and higher over time, that would be an issue. But this wetland system has an outfall. The water can leave it. So the water is only temporary ponding in here and then it leaves. Now the water surface elevation in the wetland is hardly changing at all, even though we're having a very slight increase in peak flow during the 1 year, slight increase, and we have increases in volume. The water surface elevation, we're talking about for the 1 year event, there's an increase of 0.01 feet. That's an eighth of an inch of increase in the volume of the wetlands. As you go to the 2 year and 100-year event, because of all our stormwater control measures and we're controlling peak flow, you either have 0 or it starts to actually decrease by an eighth of an inch, during a large storm event. So it's not.
I have a question if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Anthony Silva for the record. So I'm having a little bit of an issue. I'm hearing a lot of like other towns, the state, other things don't do this. Unfortunately, the rule in this town is the rule, right? So I'm having a hard time understanding. I'm not saying that your presentation is very thorough. I'm having a hard time understanding. It seems to me like you're asking for an exception to this rule because of you can't control the water in your plan. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And I understand it's a very incremental amount,
Mhm.
but being in construction myself, there are rules that are in place in the town of New Canaan. So I'm just trying to figure out if you did a system that is bigger, does that help you? Is there a system that is different? I'm just trying to understand where can we get past the goal line? Because it seems like we've been hearing about for 25 minutes is we're here and we can't get any further. There must be a way to get further in this. And I don't know if that's a bigger system or a bigger different infiltrators or I don't know, but it seems like there's a lot of this is the rule. It shouldn't be the rule, but it is the rule. We're trying to get around the rule. Does that make sense?
Just for the record, Chris Smith,
Let me just, Mr. Canis and Mr. Klein, if you want to go, what? They should stay?
Yep.
I thought you said they,
Joe is shaking his head. Yes, I'm staying.
oh, you're staying. Oh,
Yes,
okay.
I'm staying. This is.
it may not
part
matter
of the
outside
testimony.
at this.
Oh, okay.
And for the record, Chris Smith, I apologize to Commissioner Perkins. We probably aren't going to finish at 10. But I would like to respond to the question. It's my understanding that your town has this policy. It's not an ordinance, it's not a regulation adopted by the town, but it is a policy that people try to meet. And with all due respect, the question for this commission, I'll get to it in the summary, is whether there'll be an adverse impact to a wetland. So
Well,
whether
there is an adverse impact because the water is still going towards the wetlands once it reaches overflow, which I understand.
No, that's not what we've heard. We heard that from Mr. Canis, he said that the small increase in the volume that we're talking about right now is not going to have a negative impact on a downstream wetlands. And I think that's what Mr. Kenny's going to be talking about shortly. I asked Mr. Klein about that. But the issue for the commission isn't, with all due respect, again, it's not whether a town policy from your engineering department is being complied with. The question is whether the conduct that's before you is resulting in an adverse impact to a wetland or a water course. So the slight increase, the minimus increase in the volume that Mr. Donay is talking about now, and and your consultants talk about it in their reports. I think your hearing is, in the opinion of the experts, not resulting in an adverse impact to a wetland. So
That's not
that
what
should
I
be the
heard.
focus.
It doesn't what I heard, but you
Okay.
can go ahead.
Okay, where was I? Anyways, yeah, exactly. Sorry, I'll make this quick. Neighbor
We
flooding.
need to do, with all due respect, we need to
Yeah.
do what we need.
I wanna
to
get
do,
through
and,
mine.
But I was hoping we could get it done by
What time?
All right.
What time? did-
Commissioner Perkins, for the record.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you
Okay.
both had.
Number one, you don't owe me an apology. That this is the team and I'm with the team. So I'm not gonna get up and take my ball home with me. But the point that Anthony just made is a very valid one. That is the town regulation and you have to build to it. He has to hold to these regulations. And so I think the question is, are you going to meet the town regulations or not?
Again, it's a town.
This
policy.
boils down to that, in my opinion.
And again, it's a town policy that the engineering department has or Public Works has, but I'll let Mr. Donay respond to the specific questions you were getting as to whether any adjustments can be done. or
I just wanted to raise a question. You can move on with your presentation.
You want to respond?
Oh, we can look at it and see what other adjustments. We currently, from our whole development, all the water from the whole development area. So you get the building, the parking, drives, everything goes through this stormwater detention system, and the outlet for it is only 3.5 inches. So that's it. That's the low flow outlet. It's got a couple for like larger storm events, but the low flow outlet, and you don't want to make that outlet smaller because if
Understood.
something gets in there, it could clog it all up. So 3.5, you don't want to go smaller than that. We are doing a very good job as far as that. And we're trying to show the no adverse impacts, but I understand what you're saying. It's not exactly meeting the town policy for that thing. And the town policy usually talks about 25-year event. They specifically asked for the one and the other smaller storms for this. Neighbor flooding concerns. Let me go on for that real quick. Everybody's talked about their basement sump pumps. They're running all the time from groundwater water going into the basements. Now, from our site, we are not directing any storm water towards a neighbor's yard. It's all going towards the wetlands area. So we won't be directing any additional water towards there. And the thing is, they have problems now because those houses were built in groundwater. If you're gonna have pumping all the time, and when the pump fails or there's a problem, you're gonna have leaks in your foundation when you build in groundwater. And that's what those houses, they were done in that manner. We are not increasing the water surface elevation in the wetlands. All our water is going to the wetlands area, and we're not increasing that. So we're not increasing the flooding in the area from this design. You know, there is a small increase in volume going to those areas, but because of the outflow and because of our detention system, we are controlling that flow. So there's not an increase. So it's not like the wetlands are all of a sudden going to raise 3 feet higher than they used to do because we have this development. There's an outflow in our control system. So the water elevation is going to be the same in the area. So we won't be this development is not making those conditions worse than they currently are. They currently have bad flooding, and unfortunately, that's a problem when you build a house in groundwater. Quickly go through the construction phasing. All right, so I'll try to do this as quick as I can. Construction phasing, you have phase one. All right, so phase one is you're going to come into the site. You install your anti-tracking pads along the driveway entrance. You stake your limits of disturbance. Your initial is you go through and you clear the trees and vegetation within the limits of disturbance. After that, instead of just stripping the entire site at once, we want to after you clear your trees, you put your perimeter fencing, silt fencing up, and erosion control measures along the outside. We're then going to build the first haul road that goes into the property. All right, and that would be, you would strip the topsoil away from there. You'd build the haul road. And then we want to go to the west side, so that's towards the wetlands. And we want to strip the topsoil, and we want to build those the phasing temporary erosion control measures, such as the temporary diversion swale and the temporary sediment traps. All right, so we want to make sure that the western side towards the wetlands is protected first. Then after that, we'll go through the eastern side and we'll take the stumps out and remove the topsoil from that area. At the top of the ledge, we've talked about creating the diversion swale along the north side and regrading the overburden. That's the 4 feet of soil above the rock, grading that back. And that will then, with the diversion swale, will direct the uphill stormwater around the development site. Then you go to phase 2, which we've broken up into 2A, 2B, and 2C, and this is the rock removal phases. So this is going to be the mass earth excavation. So with rock removal, we're working from our the high elevations down. So our haul road goes in, and then we loop back up around it. That gets us to the top of the hill, and from there, you remove the overburden from the area that's going to be blasted. And we're going to do it as per recommendations from Bill Kenny, to do it in sections. So instead of just stripping all the soil off at once, you strip section by section. And so if you're going to blast a 50 by 50 foot area or something, you'd strip off that area. And then you have to line drill the rock face, you blast the different sections. And as you do that, you then remove the soil, or excuse me, you then remove the rock, take it down, it gets crushed, it gets processed, and then you remove it from the site. And I'll just try to skip through this quickly, but that was phase 2A, and you go through 2B, and it's done by elevation. So you're kind of creating a plateau that keeps lowering at each phase until finally you get to 2C. And at that point, you've removed all the rock from the site. And now you're ready to continue on with the rest of the work. So that's real brief on the rock removal and excavation. There was questions about around the crushing operation, what type of filtration. He was talking about the rock flour, from all the crushing and stuff, and you want to protect that area. So we had shown a crushed stone berm, but I agree, I'm totally fine with adding another filter measure around that. And these have to be movable, so it's a temporary measure. Yeah, exactly. So like hay bales, something like that, to do it. Anyways, yep.
So Chris Smith, for the record, we'll come back on Wednesday if we have to. I'd rather that it's important to go through these items and responses with the commission and to afford you the opportunity to ask questions. So when Mr. Donay is done, if we're right at 10 o'clock, we can come back and maybe take us, whatever time period. But again, we want you to be able to respond to any guys.
Yes.
Go ahead.
At least get through me.
If you have questions, please, I don't want to cut it.
Well, let me take a
short, but
poll.
We're trying to make a time.
Should we?
I'll be done by 10.
Well, you will, but how much?
I think we'll probably need a solid half hour after that.
That means 45 minutes at least, an
That's
hour.
the judges.
Maybe
say.
not, right? Yeah. Or maybe we'll be done by 11, huh? I think that's,
No, that's-
what do you think? Do you want to come, everybody want to come back on Wednesday?
Might as well at this point.
Well,
What'd you say?
I think we might as well at this point. I mean, there seems like there's a lot of things to cover here and to listen to.
Well, I think our vision is waning a little bit, okay? And I think that,
Would you like me to finish the?
finish yours,
staging,
yeah,
or-
finish yours.
I think we should definitely hear from Mr. Donay. So I mean, to get through the end.
Oh,
of
no,
his
yeah.
Sure,
And
okay.
I think
Oh,
it was a-
absolutely,
I think
absolutely.
It was
No,
a
it's
team
fine.
effort from everybody in the room here to try to get through everything tonight.
yeah, I
We're
just
not
wanted
gonna-
to say, for the record, Kathleen Holland, Michael Klein will not be able to be in attendance on Wednesday. So we should conclude anything regarding Michael tonight. Mr. Canis has another meeting, I believe, but you're available to zoom in at some point.
That's correct. For the record, Joe Canis, I have a hearing in Plainville on Wednesday night, but it's allegedly a non-controversial matter. So I can be there, unavailable between.
So that's something you. Through or.
All right, let's take a vote. Anthony, you say let's let him finish, Mr.
I would agree. I think we let him
and-
finish.
and
I
then
just
come back
feel
on
like,
Wednesday,
I
okay?
just feel like we should all be able to. To Chris's point, I think we should all be able to retain all of this and not.
George, I
have a
know
4-hour
how you
session.
feel.
You should
How do you
definitely
feel,
finish. George Perkins for the record. You should definitely finish.
Okay.
So finish up and then
I will.
we'll come back.
Okay, so on to the next phase.
But we won't
So
come
no
back
pressure.
at
That's the main
6
part of the.
on Wednesday, I don't think. We'll come back at 7, right? Or do you want to go?
I think we should do 6. These things go on longer than you think.
All right, we'll figure that out. We'll figure that out. Don't-
Wednesday as well, right? Yes, to the
So
chagrin
you
of my
didn't ask the
basketball
opinion
team.
of the 3 ladies at the end.
I did. Nobody wants to,
No, but somebody else spoke. That's why I didn't say anything.
how do you feel? How do you,
Going to stay to finish till tonight, so
you
I'm
you
not
say
like-
finish tonight, huh?
yeah, it's, I'm
what
gonna be a
about you,
minority, I
Priscilla?
can tell, but I'd rather keep going.
Katie?
I'd rather keep going too. What the worst case scenario is, I don't want to keep going and then also go to Wednesday. So
Yeah,
that would be my concern.
and Priscilla?
I think I think we're about up to here with, I'm absorbing it
Yeah,
all
yeah,
and
absorb,
everything. And
yeah,
at some
yeah.
point,
One thing I do just want to say, Kathleen Holland, for the record, you have a lot of reading to do. Once the public hearing closes, you're free to do all of that reading. So it's not like you can't continue to review the documentation that you have. If you have a technical question regarding something that you're reading in that matter, you're to call me and I will, try to answer it and get you the answer. So it's not that, I know I feel like we're rushing a little bit. It has been a lot of information that's being digested this evening, but you're not expected to completely digest it this evening. You're taking it in. But I can appreciate everyone's time. This has been a long one, so it's a complicated, complex matter. We want everyone to have the opportunity to speak and to get their questions heard, answered, asked, so that ultimately you all make a top-notch decision when it comes to that point. So we are where we are. I think at least Derek, let's get through Derek. He's.
Oh, yeah, I want to get through, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Derek, are you ready?
I'm ready. now. Let's go back. All right, back to, okay, so now we move past the rock removal phase, and this is, now this is kind of like a transition stage. So this is where people were asked, oh, where are the sediment traps in this phase? This is one, sorry, go back to the rock removal one real quick, because maybe I should have done a 3A and a 3B and added another sheet to this. But as you see on the western side, you have the temporary diversion swales and the sediment traps. Those are those in green over there. Now, the next phase, we're going to start, so now you can go to the next sheet, and we're going to be building the western retaining wall, starting from the north, so upper left there, and working our way south. So as that wall gets built, you'll be removing those diversion swales and sediment traps as you go. So the first section, you'll need access to the wall area, and you'll start from the north and you'll just work your way down. So that's why the sediment traps and diversion swales will still be in operation until you finish all this work, and you just kind of remove it as you go south. So working on the retaining wall, starting on the northern end, you'll build this wall and you start to fill behind the wall, and you're building your stormwater retention systems, working north to south. You build your stormwater retention systems, you put your hydrodynamic oil grit separators in there, you have your catch basins. And as you get to those sections, like, okay, now I've got that done. I don't need the diversion and temporary sediment basin anymore. Now I've got the catch basin, which will have filter fabric in it, but you'll have now new collection and treatment measures. Plus now you have this wall that's it levels out the area. You don't have the erosion control problem anymore. Usually at that point, the top of the wall is still very much exposed. So you're controlling your stormwater runoff during this phase through that. And you would do that continuously as you move south along that wall. So as you do that, you've now installed your drainage systems, you've got your wall up, the site is more or less level and at finished grade. And as they're doing that, now you're going through and you're building your foundations, all those piers, the different columns, you're putting all that in, you're putting in the rest of your drainage infrastructure through the site, your sanitary sewer, your utilities. So that's all during this phase. And you're using now the new stormwater treatment systems that have been installed as your control measures. You have your retaining walls up and you have a better surface now that you can control. Once that the underlying infrastructure is in, you go to the next phase. And now you're getting ready to start building the actual building. What they would do though, we have a lot of rock, we're gonna use it. You would cover all the driveway and parking areas. You'd probably put a geofabric down first and then you'd put crushed stone on top of it. Why? That gives you this great surface for operation. You don't have a muddy surface. You're now going to have a better controlled surface during stormwater for stormwater control. Then that keeps the site cleaner for while you're doing construction on the building, because construction of the building, the superstructure is going to take a little while. So now you have a stable area to work with. Now you go to the next phase. After the superstructure is built, now you'll do your final. Now you're doing your pavement, your curbings, sidewalks. You put your signs up, your roadway pavement, any other little site features that are going on. That's all done during this phase, and your installed drainage systems are all being used at this time to control everything. As the development finishes, the main part of the development, once that's done, you've done your landscaping up there, everything, now you work your way out the driveway. And that's what we talked about earlier. So you'll scrape off your anti-tracking pad, you scrape off the top layers of protection, you'll do your infiltration test to make sure everything's working well, or do any remediation measures. If not, then you build your porous pavement system, working your way out. And that's the end of the project then. Now you have a completed project. So that's the different phases with a lot more detail as everyone requested, which was good. One comment I just wanted to make, and this was in, I think, one of Joe Canis's comments. There was a question in regards to Hill Street, and he had reviewed an old Google map view of Hill Street that showed spider cracking, and he had written that in his comments and stuff. I knew that it wasn't in that condition anymore. I checked with Maria Coplet, and back in 2018, that's when they milled Hill Street and they repaved it. So it's in much better condition now than it was in 2015 when Google took their video of it. So if you go out there now, it looks like new pavement. It looks in good condition. All right, so therefore, in our professional opinion, the proposed activities associated with construction, if managed properly, are not likely to result in the unreasonable pollution, impairment, or destruction of air, water, and other natural resources of the state.
How about an
Yes,
adverse
there you
impact to underwater coast?
That was for the drainage, yes. And yes, but no, all these measures, they're being used and it's done in a detailed way. Construction happens all the time in places. Rock crushing happens all the time in places. It's not polluting the entire world every time it does it. As the previous interviewers had said, they've worked on hundreds, thousands, I forget what it was. Thousands, projects of rock crushing project. I assume, but there's integrity, he's not polluting thousands of projects in thousands of areas. It occurs, and there are control measures that can be done to control the rock crushing and the dust, and it's not the industrial plant that they showed in their video. Going through now, that's the majority of the presentation. I just want to go through and hit some of the responses to their latest
If
one.
you want, we're coming back on Wednesday, so if you want to pick up on some of those miscellaneous comments later, then that might be an appropriate time.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
And
it's
and
not
we
fun.
certainly appreciate the commission and everyone and Director Holland in staying here, especially in light of this storm outside. Everybody, please travel safely home, and I guess we'll see you on Wednesday at 6.
Yeah. What Kathleen and I have talked about now is maybe, but we want to talk to our attorney to see if we can combine the 13th of March with Monday and do that on Monday, the 1st. So we'll finish, maybe we can finish up with you and then go into our workshop, so to speak, as far as the decision.
That would depend if the commissioners were ready to begin discussion by
Yeah.
start.
We'll just be finishing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's your schedule.
Might not be possible. So as I think about it, there's still a lot of.
You
material
know,
to get through.
there's been a lot of material, and personally, I would like the opportunity to have some time to go back, review it, reflect on it, before starting to
Decide. Deliberate.
express
Yeah,
opinion.
Yeah.
Pete Gelderman, are you on Zoom and available? Maybe you could turn on your camera and unmute yourself.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay.
Well,
The answer is, I mean, as Angela said, you know, being able to digest and read everything is important for the commission. You have 35 days after your hearing is closed to come to a decision. So you can start whenever the public hearing is over, that you feel that you want to start discussing it. As long as you make a decision within 35 days. So that's up to you, but
Might be too early.
Wednesday. Personally.
Probably too early, Peter.
to start discussing it.
To start discussing it 48 hours from now, yeah.
Yeah, yes, I would think so. I mean, again, that's up to the commission. You could start discussing as soon as you want to, but again, that's up to the commission. Once the public hearing's closed, you have 35 days. So.
Got it.
One housekeeping item, Kathleen Holland for the record. Mr. Canis and Mr. Klein, I don't believe we put your CVs into the record, so I would like to have your CVs and add them to the record. That would be helpful. I'll provide them online to the commission as well.
So have we decided on 6 o'clock on Wednesday? Everybody okay with that again? Okay,
Yeah.
6 o'clock it'll be on March 1st. We'll continue the meeting on March 1st then.
Okay.
Thank you
Yep.
again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right.
And